Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. American Comics. Old Wolverine, do whatever he wants. Chapter 81. Buzz Buzz. The metal devices in the interrogation room kept vibrating and hissing, slowly floating in Lorna's anger, and slowly hovering in the air. Click. The metal buckle that trapped Lorna on the chair suddenly popped open. She twitched her hands, broke free from the restraints of the chair, and slowly stood up with cold eyes. Then with a casual move, a pen flew over and slowly floated in the palm of his hand. She stared at the pen floating in the palm of her hand as she controlled it, feeling the crazy power gushing out of her body. A burst of joy appeared on her pale face, and her weak body was instantly filled with energy. After taking a deep breath, Lorna raised the corners of her mouth slightly and couldn't help but murmured, "It feels so good to have the power back." Blue's eyes widened and he looked at Lorna with fear on his face. Panic instantly spread in his heart. He knew that once Lorna released the control, no one here would be her opponent. Phew, PFF'd. Before he could turn around and run away, a burst of wind suddenly sounded. The pen in Lorna's palm seemed to turn into a bullet at this moment, flying out quickly. The thick and blunt pen, under Lorna's control, became the sharpest weapon. It instantly hit Blue's chest, and the whole pen was submerged in it. It stirred wildly in Blue's chest, like a blender, completely destroying the internal organs. It was smashed, and finally penetrated from his back. Warm blood spattered crazily as the pen flew out, all spreading on Anna behind him, and the strong smell of blood spread in the small interrogation room. Bang! Blue's body fell heavily, and his dying eyes stared at the collar on the ground. He could not figure out why the restraining collar suddenly broke. Without Blue as a poison source, the yellow poison was quickly dispersed by the exhaust fan. Lorna strolled up, her eyes flashing with emerald fluorescent light, the lights above her head crackling, the light flickering on and off. "You, don't mess around." Anna's face was full of fear. Through the blood-stained mask, she stared at Lorna, who was walking slowly, as if she saw the god of death approaching step by step. The fear from the depths of her soul made her tremble uncontrollably, and her legs moved back unconsciously. "Kill me, you can't get out of this prison, and the government won't let you go." Fear caused her voice to tremble uncontrollably, and her lips trembled as she stared at Lorna. The corners of Lorna's mouth raised slightly, staring at her as if looking at a dead thing. The next moment, Anna only felt that the metal iron ring on the gas mask contracted rapidly. When she reacted and wanted to pull off the mask, the iron ring had already tightly clasped her neck, and a bloody mark was instantly drawn from her neck. A strong feeling of suffocation came over her, and she kept pulling at the mask, struggling hard but to no avail. The iron ring was completely embedded in his neck. The feeling of being on the verge of death caused tears to fall from her eyes, and she collapsed to the ground. She stretched out her hand and looked at Lorna begging for mercy, but her voice for mercy could not come out. Her neck was clamped so that she could not make any sound. He could only stare at Lorna with a pitiful expression, his palms constantly hooked in front of his eyes, trying to get her to let him go. But Lorna didn't look at her at all, and walked straight to the door. With a wave of her hand, the locked iron door popped open on its own, and Lorna walked out of the interrogation room unhurriedly. Anna's vision behind her gradually blurred, and the feeling of suffocation made her unable to see clearly what was in front of her. Her hazy eyes stared at Lorna's back, and she stopped struggling with unwillingness, and there was no movement at all. The prison police who had previously been guarding the door sensed the danger in the interrogation room and fled in a hurry to sound the alarm. Toot toot. In an instant, the alarms in the entire prison sounded wildly, and Area C instantly entered a red state, with all red warning lights flashing crazily. "It's so noisy." In the corridor, Lorna's face was illuminated red by the warning lights. The dazzling red lights and the noisy sounds made her unhappy. She looked up and stared at the rows of warning lights and raised her hands angrily. Bang bang bang. The metal wick in the warning light exploded instantly, all the lights exploded completely, and the broken glass crashed down. Lorna walked on the broken glass, which crunched under her feet. But just after taking a few steps, there was a rush of footsteps, and a dozen heavily armed prison guards stood in the corridor, forming a human wall. "Don't move." The dark muzzle of the gun was aimed at Lorna, and the auxiliary infrared sight lines on the gun were all aimed at Lorna's eyebrows and heart. Looking at this group of heavily armed guys, Lorna looked solemn and the emerald light in her eyes flashed. The next moment, She gritted her teeth fiercely, tightened her fingers, and the weird green light was instantly released, spreading out quickly like a shock wave. Buzz! The roar resounded throughout the corridor, and the green mist instantly wrapped around the rifles of all the prison guards, causing more than a dozen rifles to tremble crazily. The prison guards were shocked. Shoot! All the prison guards pulled the trigger almost at the same time, but then they realized that no matter how hard they tried, the trigger seemed to be welded to death and could not be pulled at all. Whoops! The next moment, under the control of Lorna, a dozen trembling rifles quickly broke away from the prison guards' control, suspended in the air, and turned their muzzles to aim at their owners. Seeing the infrared light aimed at them, all the prison guards were completely panicked, staring at the muzzle of the gun and retreating unconsciously. Bang bang bang! The triggers of more than a dozen rifles were automatically pulled, the sound of gunshots was loud, the muzzles sprayed out blazing fire, high-speed rotating bullets flew out, and the cartridge cases continued to fall. The prison guards had nowhere to hide. The hot bullets all hit them, and blood holes exploded in their chests one after another, and blood splashed out instantly. Bang, bang, bang. Amidst the wailing, the prison guards fell one after another, the smell of blood was everywhere, and the hot blood poured on the corridor. Crack! As the last prison guard fell to the ground, the green light dissipated, and the dozen rifles in the air seemed to have lost their traction and fell to the ground one after another. Whew! Lorna's face turned pale, her legs softened, and she almost fell down. She quickly stretched out her hands to support the wall next to her, leaned against the wall and breathed deeply, her eyes were full of fatigue. Although she can control metal objects, it is not without cost. Every time she uses her ability, it is a huge test of her physical and mental strength. The longer she uses it, the stronger her ability is, and the greater the physical consumption. In addition, she was tortured by Anna and Blue before, and her body itself was a little overwhelmed. Now she uses her ability continuously, which is already overloaded. Just as she was leaning against the wall to catch her breath, the loudspeaker in the corner began to buzz. A faint voice came from the loudspeaker, "Lorna, are you okay?" "Klaus." Lorna looked at the loudspeaker and recognized the owner of the voice. "It's me." Klaus stared at Lorna on the surveillance screen and continued, "Can you still move? If you can, we'll meet on the second floor of Area C." Lorna nodded, couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief, and said, "I'll be there right away." She took a breath and leaned against the wall, stepped over the corpses on the ground, and walked towards the second floor. If there is no support from companions, it would be difficult for one person to escape from this prison. Area C main control room. Okay, we have to leave quickly. Klaus saw that Lorna on the screen was fine, and he breathed a sigh of relief, then stood up and rushed to join her. Etc. Logan stopped him, stared at the surveillance screen, and said in a deep voice, "They are coming." The picture shows the corridor outside the main control room, and a group of heavily armed special police officers are rushing here quickly. Bang bang bang. The next moment, the door was slammed wildly, and an anxious voice came from outside, "Jesse, open the door." Hearing this voice, Klaus's heart tightened and he stared at the surveillance camera. At this time, the entire main control room door has been completely surrounded by special police. As long as the door is opened, the two of them will be beaten to pieces by dozens of rifles in an instant. Pong! The SWAT police outside frowned when they heard the response, and immediately began to use the door-breaking device to smash the door hard. The door frame was constantly shaking as it was hit, and the heavy iron door was instantly bent. Just one more blow and the entire door would collapse. "Hold my hand." Klaus held Logan's arm and quickly activated his ability, making their bodies instantly transparent. Pong! Almost at the same time, the door was broken open, and a large number of special police officers broke in and searched every corner of the control room. At the same time, they also discovered two prison guards lying on the ground. After one of the special police officers determined that there were no bombs hidden under their bodies, they opened their bodies and checked the beating of their carotid arteries. "Captain, he's dead." The SWAT officer stood up to report. The captain looked gloomy and stared at the main control room. "Captain, there is no one." On the other side, the special police officer responsible for the search also came back to report. Except for two corpses, nothing was found in the entire main control room. But they didn't know that at this time Klaus and Logan were hiding in the corner, watching a group of special police officers walking around in front of them with indifferent expressions, and even the muzzle of one of the special police officers almost touched them, but nothing was found either. Listening to the report, the captain looked gloomy and kept looking around. No, they must not have left yet. The captain spoke with great determination. The door was locked just now, which means the person must still be in the room. Turn on thermal imaging. The captain suddenly gave instructions. A special police officer stepped forward, took out the thermal imager, and began to scan the main control room. However, as soon as the thermal imager started working, it showed a burly figure standing in front of him. Here, the special police officer panicked and subconsciously shouted. The next moment, a cold light flashed, and the thermal image was instantly chopped into pieces by the sharp claw blade, and it also scratched the neck of the special police officer. The round head crashed to the ground with a face full of terror, and blood splashed out like a fountain. Fark! Everyone looked with horror on their faces and saw Logan, who seemed to appear out of thin air. Klaus next to him looked at the body lying on the ground with blood splattering, and said speechlessly, "Can't we just search it casually and then retreat? If you have to do any thermal imaging, you are just beating workers. Why do you have to work hard for that salary? It's time, don't play anymore. Shoot now," the captain ordered with anger on his face. Under his roar, the other SWAT officers reacted instantly, aiming their guns at Logan and Klaus, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Bang bang bang. Fierce gunshots instantly resounded throughout the main control room, and all the hot bullets sprayed out, like raindrops, densely shooting towards Logan. Logan almost subconsciously dodged and pinned Klaus behind him. Countless bullets all reached his body. Bullet holes exploded one after another in his body, blood spattered, his clothes were instantly torn, and his body was full of bullet holes. The physical pain caused Logan to grit his teeth and roar, anger gradually spreading in his eyes. More than 10 seconds later, the SWAT officers fired all the bullets in their magazines. Gun smoke filled the muzzles, and bullet casings covered the ground. They quickly changed their magazines and raised their guns to aim, but they did not shoot directly, but stared intently. Logan wanted to confirm the other party's situation. At this time, Logan had almost no good flesh on his back, and the bullets exploded into bloody flowers on his body. His eyes were full of anger, and he slowly stood up straight, all his muscles exerting force at this moment. Snap! Under the squeeze of the muscles, the hot warheads were squeezed out one after another and fell with a clanging sound. In just a moment, there were already dense shrapnel under the feet. When all the special police officers saw this scene, their faces were filled with astonishment, and at the same time, their heads exploded in an instant. The firepower output just now would have completely shattered even a large rock, but it was unable to penetrate this man's body. Not only them, but even Klaus, who was pinned down by Logan, looked shocked. He looked up in shock and looked at the angry Logan, while looking down at the shrapnel that was clanging on the ground. Although he had read the legend of Wolverine in comics, he actually always believed that it was the result of deliberate exaggeration by those painters. But now he knows that those seemingly exaggerated comics are not exaggerated at all. Wolverine's self-healing ability is really ridiculously strong. In this situation, it would be enough for a normal person to die hundreds of times, but not only did Logan resist, but his actions didn't seem to be affected at all. In the eyes of the astonished crowd, Logan gritted his teeth, suddenly grabbed Klaus, and threw him behind a long table to prevent him from being injured by bullets. Then he turned around and looked directly at the group of SWAT officers. His angry eyes made him look like a hungry wolf. Crack! The silver steel claws flashed out suddenly, and the cold light was diffused. With his roar, his body bounced up suddenly, like a hunting wolf king, and pounced in front of a SWAT officer. The sharp steel claws easily penetrated the opponent's bulletproof vest, and pulled it hard to both sides. In an instant, blood splattered, and the SWAT officer's upper and lower body separated and fell heavily to the ground. Shoot! The captain saw this scene, his scalp almost exploded, and he gave a stern order. Bang bang bang! The SWAT officers reacted, pulled the trigger with fear on their faces, and the bullets flew. Logan resisted these hot bullets, ignoring the fierce sound of bullets breaking through the wind, and leapt again, his steel claws piercing the heart of another SWAT. He was like a wolf king in the forest, moving around in the main control room. His body was almost impossible to lock, but every time he stopped, a body was bound to fall. Gun smoke and bloody smell filled the main control room, and the SWATs fell one after another. His steel claws were like the sickle of the god of death, harvesting one life after another without hesitation. Crack! Logan nailed the last 2 SWATs who wanted to escape to the wall, and the splattered blood soaked him completely. After retracting the steel claws, the 2 SWATs fell heavily to the ground, with endless fear on their faces. My hair. Klaus, who was hiding behind the corner of the table, showed half of his head and watched this one-sided massacre. His scalp was almost about to explode, and his eyes were full of astonishment. The horror of Wolverine refreshed his cognition again. At the same time, Logan stood in front of the corpses and gasped for breath. His muscles were tense to squeeze out the shrapnel on his body, and his self-healing factor quickly restored the craters on his body. Prestige plus 10. Prestige plus 10. The thought of prestige increase suddenly flashed in his mind. Increased by 20. Logan was slightly stunned. Klaus was the only mutant here, so he should only have increased by 10 points. He looked back in surprise, and then he noticed a girl with short green hair standing outside the door. Hey, Lorna. Klaus also noticed her and quickly stood up and ran over. I'm so glad you're okay. After that, he quickly took Lorna's hand and walked in front of Logan, and said to her excitedly, "Oh my god, you must not have seen it just now, this guy is so fierce." He paused and added, "By the way, let me introduce you, this is Logan Howlett, codenamed Wolverine, he used to be an X-Man." "Okay, we have to leave here first." Logan decisively stopped his nagging, his eyes fixed on the blood-stained surveillance screen. At this time, the surveillance showed that more prison guards were rushing towards Area C. "I'm not late, am I?" Reed Strucker quickly opened the door and got out of the car, staring at the airtight prison with an anxious expression. The warden in uniform quickly stepped forward to greet him. "No, Lorna and her accomplices are still in Area C. These thugs." Reed looked angry, touching the painful bruises on his face. With cold eyes, "The thugs attacked me and tied me to a chair. If my wife hadn't come back early, I would still be tied there." "On the chair." The warden was shocked and asked quickly, "They didn't hurt you, did they?" "I was punched a few times, but nothing happened." Reed took a deep breath and asked again, "How's it going inside now?" The warden hesitated for a moment and then said truthfully, "It's not going well. Both teams we sent have lost contact." After a pause, he immediately said loudly, "But don't worry, I have sent people to round up Lorna and her accomplices. If they want to get out of the prison, they can only cover them with white cloth and let the forensic doctors carry them out." Reed did not respond directly. He looked at the prison wall and sighed longly. He knew that this group of mutants would not be so easy to deal with. If they really wanted to attack by force, there would probably be a lot of casualties. After a moment of silence, Reed said, "Stop attacking first. I will go negotiate with them and try to get them to surrender." Negotiation. The warden panicked and said quickly, "Mr. Reed, these guys are a group of thugs and will not agree to negotiate. Let's fight for it, otherwise we will suffer too much if we fight." Reed walked into the prison area without looking back. On the other side, Logan covered Klaus and Lorna and ran into the stairwell, just in time to meet John and Victor, who came to join them. "Lorna, are you okay?" After John saw Lorna, he quickly came up to help her out of concern. At this time, the girl's physical strength has not recovered much, her body is a little weak, and her face is pale. "Fine." Lorna waved her hands and said tiredly, "Just take a rest." "What's the next plan?" Logan interrupted their conversation. "The top priority was to find a way to escape from this prison quickly. I asked the responding prison guard to prepare a car for us." John took out a bunch of car keys from his pocket and shook them. "Just park it in the basement, we can drive out." As soon as these words came out, everyone stared at the bunch of keys in astonishment. Victor looked speechless and said, "Is this your plan? You'd better tell me that the car the prison guards prepared for you is a tank." Logan couldn't help but speak. "No, it's just a police car with a full tank of gas." John shook his head and added, "The prison guard said there are 6 pistols in the car to protect us." Everyone couldn't help but remain silent again. My god, 6 pistols, really heavy firepower. Victor couldn't help complaining. There are all SWAT police armed with live ammunition outside, and maybe the helicopter gunships are already on their way. You want us to drive out in a police car with 6 pistols. As soon as we show our heads, we will all must be beaten into a sieve. Forehead. John was silent for a moment and said honestly, this is indeed the plan. Logan was completely speechless. Okay, I should let you explain the entire plan before we leave. It was John who told him that he had a brilliant plan before, but Luo simply thought that he had hidden all his back plans. Unexpectedly, this guy is a brash man full of muscles. Bang bang bang. Suddenly, gunfire rang out from the stairs below, and bullets flew quickly. At the same time, there was a rush of footsteps above the stairs. Lorna's eyes were quick and her hands were quick, her eyes flashed with green light, and all the bullets that were flying stopped in midair. She waved her hand fiercely, and all the bullets changed directions and accurately penetrated the foreheads of all the guards downstairs, causing blood to explode along with their brains. Call. After doing this, Lorna gasped for breath and her face became increasingly pale. There was not much strength left at her disposal now. Fortunately, she successfully acted as a deterrent. The dozens of guards fell to the ground, which shocked the guards who came after them. Everyone guarded the stairs and did not dare to attack rashly. At this time, a sizzling sound of electricity sounded from a loudspeaker outside, and Reed's voice came through the loudspeaker. People inside, listen, I am Prosecutor Reed Strack. You have been surrounded. Quickly put down your resistance and surrender. I promise that I will not take the initiative to harm you. If you still resist, you will not end well. No, people can escape from this prison. His voice spread through the loudspeaker and resounded throughout the prison area. Logan looked solemn and said quickly, what should we do now? At least John, this reckless man's plan, can't be implemented. If they want to escape, they must think of a foolproof plan, otherwise everyone will be completely trapped and die here. Several people looked at each other, and for a moment they had no idea. With their abilities, there is no way to escape from here. Surrounded by layers of layers, the entire prison has long become a big net. Even if they can fly, they can't fly out. Logan looked at the appearance of several people and sighed helplessly. It was useless to count on them, and he had to find a way on his own. He immediately frowned and began to think deeply. Suddenly, a flash of light flashed before his eyes, and an idea suddenly came to him. You guys wait for me here for a while. After saying that, he turned around and ran back to the main control room without hesitation. Everyone looked at his back with blank expressions on their faces. Soon, Logan arrived at the main control room. Ignoring the blood stains on the computer operating panel, he began to call up the surveillance videos of each cell on the big screen. Looking at the mutants wearing restraint collars inside, Logan's eyes lit up. There are quite a few mutants imprisoned in the cells. As long as their restrictions are lifted and enough chaos is created, it will be equivalent to an additional support army. Immediately, Logan took action, opening all the cell doors and removing the restraining collars of all mutants. The cell door suddenly opened and the restraining collar suddenly fell off. All the prisoners in the cell were stunned. They didn't react for a while and didn't dare to go out rashly. Logan pulled the microphone and loudly shouted through the speakers throughout the prison area, everyone, from this moment on, you are free. These prison guards and officials who claim to be superiors can no longer control you. Let's break out of this prison together and welcome the free air outside. Listening to Logan's passionate voice from the loudspeaker, all the prisoners were stunned for a moment. Don't hesitate. Those guys from the government won't let us go easily. If we continue to stay here, we will only die. Now, fight out with me. This is our last chance. Logan's voice continued to ring in the prison. In an instant, all the prisoners were completely boiling. Kill out. Kill these guys. Kill. Quote. The roar spread throughout the prison area, and all the prison guards looked panicked. They blew their whistles and raised their guns and shouted, don't move. Stop all of them. However, before they could finish their words, the mutinous prisoners rushed in instantly. These guys who were fed up with the suppression could no longer stop unleashing the bestiality in their hearts, turning the entire prison upside down. Looking at the picture on the surveillance camera, Logan heaved a sigh of relief and raised the corners of his mouth. Prestige +10. Prestige +10. Prestige +10. As hundreds of prisoners broke out of their cages and wreaked havoc in the prison area, Logan's prestige also skyrocketed. In just a moment, his prestige had risen to 191 points. Obviously, daring to rush into the main control room and liberate these prisoners in such a tight prison, such a feat can indeed make many people admire Logan. Unfortunately, not all of the people released were mutants. There were also many ordinary humans mixed in. The prestige points these ordinary humans provided him were really limited. In addition, not everyone will be in awe of Logan. Many people have long been dazzled by the freedom that is just around the corner. How can they have time to express their admiration? All he could think about was how to break out of the prison. And these people naturally cannot provide any prestige points to Logan. However, even so, Logan is already very satisfied in his heart. His main purpose of releasing these prisoners is to muddy the water, and gaining prestige points is an unexpected surprise. In addition to the skyrocketing increase in prestige points, free points and enhancement points also increased by 10 points each. Logan couldn't help but raise the corners of his mouth slightly. These points will undoubtedly make his strength a qualitative leap. In addition, what excites him even more is the column of special abilities. Awakening the special ability, Annihilation. Logan's eyes flashed as he looked at the newly awakened special ability. Although he had previously felt that he was not far away from awakening his special abilities, he never expected that this day would come so suddenly. He stared closely at this newly awakened special ability, and he also had suspicions in his heart. When the heat vision was awakened last time, the prestige value exceeded 10 points, and now Annihilation will be awakened, which should be the result of the prestige value exceeding 100 points. What made it difficult for him to contain his inner joy was that this Annihilation skill was too terrifying. According to the introduction of the Annihilation skill, Annihilation can melt living creatures within a certain range. This terrifying skill can definitely allow Logan to solve a lot of big troubles. You must know that whether it is a steel claw or a thermal sight, its penetration power has certain limitations. For example, vibranium shields or metals made of Edelman alloy cannot be penetrated by steel claws. The current heat vision that has not been enhanced with enhancement points is probably too troublesome. If faced with an enemy who has these metals as armor, Logan's strength will be greatly reduced. And with Annihilation, Logan can ignore these armors and directly melt the opponent's life. Logan couldn't help but take a deep breath and suppress the joy in his heart. Logan. At this time, a shout from outside the door interrupted Logan's thinking in time. Looking at the completely rioting prison on the screen, he turned around without looking back and hurried to join Lorna and others. As the entire prison began to riot, all the prison staff were completely panicked. Reed's voice started to tremble as he wanted to negotiate downstairs. You let those mutants and felons go. Do you know what the outcome will be? The whole city will be in complete chaos. You made a big mistake. Quote, he understands very well that if these mutants and felons escape from prison and become desperados living outside, no one is sure what they will do. I am afraid that in the next long period of time, countless things will happen in the city. Unexplained events. You let them all go. Listening to Reed's voice, Klaus looked surprised. Only then did he understand the purpose of Logan's sudden run to the control room. Logan nodded. Without them helping us attract firepower, we wouldn't be able to escape at all. This is the only way we can escape. Those difficult mutants and felons were enough for Reed and the others to deploy a large number of manpower to deal with them, alleviating the pressure faced by Logan and the others. It seems that this riot is enough for them. Maybe the warden and prosecutors of this prison will resign. Klaus couldn't help but shake his head when he heard the roar that echoed throughout the prison. He had to say that Logan's move was indeed very bold. Bang! At this time, gunshots suddenly sounded downstairs, and Reed's guard seemed to be attacked. Get down now. Logan decisively seized this opportunity and rushed to the first floor with a few people. At this time, the scene below was in chaos. A large number of mutants and felons in prison uniforms grabbed firearms and continuously attacked the guards, with bullets flying everywhere. Facing the attack of these people, the guards could only find bunkers to defend themselves. The warden and Reed were escorted by a group of guards and fled in a hurry. The whole prison was in complete chaos. Logan and the others did not join the melee, but ran non-stop to the underground parking garage. The journey was smooth, the guards were too busy with the frenzied felons and mutants to even notice them. Several people ran to the basement. At this time, there were police armored vehicles lined up in the basement. The bodies were covered with bulletproof steel plates. Even the tires were specially made. Even if they ran over the spike strips, they would not cause any damage to the wheels. Better than I thought. Logan couldn't help but pat the car body. I thought the car John was talking about was an ordinary police car, but I didn't expect it to be a police armored car like this. This kind of car is enough to help them withstand most bullets. Stop talking nonsense and get in the car. John smashed the cabinet where the keys were stored in the garage, took out 2 keys and threw one to Logan. 2 vehicles go out together. If one is surrounded, the other can still provide support. Logan and John each picked a car. He was responsible for taking Victor, while John was with Lorna and Klaus. The powerful armored car, with its engine roaring like a raging beast, rushed out of the basement door in a moment. At this time, the riot was still going on. The SWAT and prisoners were fighting hard, and there were a steady stream of soldiers coming to support outside the prison. When these soldiers saw Logan's vehicle, they turned their guns without hesitation and fired wildly at the vehicle. Ding ding ding. The bulletproof steel plate was instantly filled with dense gunfire, but fortunately it did not penetrate the steel plate, and even the thickened bulletproof glass could not penetrate it. Logan rushed through the crowd, stepping on the accelerator to the bottom. There is a machine gun. Victor in the back seat saw the weapons on the car, excitedly picked up the machine gun, stretched out the window and fired wildly in response to the soldiers, shooting. Bang bang bang. The dense gunfire and the powerful machine guns almost made the soldiers unable to raise their heads. Victor laughed loudly in front of the car window, as if he had returned to World War II. Logan looked solemn, pointed the front of the car at the closed gate, and shouted, "Victor, sit tight." Victor quickly retracted his body and grabbed the handle of the car tightly. Logan stepped on the accelerator without hesitation and rushed straight to the gate. Bang! There was a loud bang, and the heavy door could not stop the armored vehicle that was like a beast, and the door frame was suddenly bounced open. John and the others behind followed closely behind. Almost at the same time, the police cars guarding outside the prison started and chased them one after another. A chase drama began on the empty road. "Logan, the patrol team is catching up. We can't take them back to the camp. We must get rid of those guys." John's shout came from another car on the intercom. "If the location of the camp is locked by the patrol team, it will be a disaster for all mutants." Logan also understood the seriousness of the matter. After thinking for a while, he pulled the intercom and said, "You go first, I will lead them away." "No, together." Before John finished speaking, he saw Logan suddenly turn the steering wheel and slam on the brakes. With a beautiful drift, the vehicle was stuck in the middle of the road, and the several cars speeding behind were forced to stop instantly. Seeing this, he had no choice but to leave first. "It's time to kill again." Victor held the machine gun, licked his lips with his tongue, and stared at the dozen patrol special police who got off the police car behind him. These people used the car door as a cover, hid behind the car, and pointed their guns at the motorcycle. Logan looked at these people, took a deep breath, and told Victor, "Don't get out of the car for a while, I'll deal with them." "Hey, I can't let you take the limelight every time." Victor patted the machine gun in his hand. "This guy is getting impatient." Logan rolled his eyes at him and said in a deep voice, "I want to try my new ability." "New ability?" Victor was stunned, then reacted, exclaimed in disbelief, "You awakened a new ability again. My God, when? Why does God care about you so much? This successive awakening of new abilities is too unfair to other mutants." "Just awakened." Logan's mouth corners slightly raised, and he opened the door and got out of the car without hesitation, like a lone hero, standing in front of more than a dozen police cars and dozens of special police, staring at them coldly. "Put your hands up, hold your head and squat down." The car door opened, and as soon as Logan got out of the car, the dark muzzles of the guns were all pointed at him. "Hey, don't be so nervous." Logan looked at the red dots of the infrared scope on his body and said, "Gentlemen, let's all calm down, sit down and have a cup of tea and talk." The leader of the SWAT waved the gun in his hand. "Don't play tricks, squat down quickly." Buzz. Suddenly, a SWAT raised a device that looked like a flashlight, and a bright blue light projected an image, which was Reed's face full of scars. He stared at Logan and said sternly, "Brother, I don't care who you are, and I don't want to know your past, but now, you have to pay the price for your actions." Obviously, Logan's act of releasing the prisoners has made the prosecutor angry. Logan looked at the image and smiled slightly. "Prosecutor Reed, you'd better stay in the infirmary. You can't get involved in what's going on outside." After that, Logan suddenly raised his gun. Bang! The piercing gunshots rang out, and the whistling bullets instantly smashed the projection equipment. Reed cursed and gradually disappeared. Shoot! Logan's gunshots made all the special police panic and quickly pulled the trigger. Bang! 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 The fierce gunshots rang out, and the bullets splashed like rain. Logan quickly turned sideways and quickly hid behind the armored vehicle. The bulletproof steel plates on the car were swept by bullets, making a series of ding-dong sounds, but Logan hid behind the car leisurely. After a while, the gunshots gradually stopped, and the special police shouted, "I warn you one last time, put down your weapons, raise your hands and stand up, otherwise we will have to use heavy firepower equipment." The special police next to him had already taken out the individual portable rockets. Such shells only need one shot to blow up Logan's entire armored vehicle. "Okay, no problem, I'll come out." Logan threw out the pistol, and it landed accurately at the feet of the special police who was speaking. The SWAT stared at the pistol suspiciously, picked it up vigilantly, and then continued to stare at the armored vehicle, guarding against any small movements of the other party. "Jimmy, what are you doing?" In the armored vehicle, Victor looked at Logan's movements and felt that this guy was more like playing with the group of SWAT. "Where is your new ability? Use it quickly. If we delay any longer, their support will arrive and we will not be able to escape." Victor lowered his voice and urged Logan, looking anxious. Immediately, Logan smiled slightly and walked out from behind the armored vehicle with his hands raised. "Gentlemen, don't shoot." He stared at the group of SWAT with a smile, as if he had surrendered. His obedience made the SWAT not know what to do for a while. They looked at each other, and they were still a little worried in their hearts. "Go, put a restraining collar on him." The captain took out the collar and handed it to a SWAT next to him. The SWAT officer looked at the collar, then at Logan, and swallowed nervously. Just as he was about to walk out, he quickly shrank back in fear. "Captain, something is wrong, look at his eyes." Eyes. The captain was stunned and turned his head to look. At this time, he found that Logan's eyes were flashing with white light, and there seemed to be no pupils in his eye sockets, only the whites of his eyes, and the light gradually became dazzling. The sudden change made the SWAT officers dare not approach rashly. But the next second, the white light in Logan's eye sockets suddenly bloomed like a spark, and the bright white light was like the sun in the sky. The white light instantly spread to Logan's body, and there was no human figure on his body, only a bright and strong light. The bright light made everyone close their eyes tightly and couldn't open their eyes. Victor in the car blocked his eyes with his palms, and the dazzling light made him feel uncomfortable. What kind of ability is this, a flashlight? He couldn't help but complain while covering his eyes, but even though his eyes were closed and he even covered them with his palms, he couldn't seem to block the direct light. The bright light seemed to be able to penetrate all obstacles and bloom in front of his pupils. "Ah!" A miserable roar suddenly came. It was the voice of the special police. They seemed to have seen something extremely terrifying, and their screams were full of trembling. Victor forced himself to hold on to the light and squinted his eyes to look out. But just a glance, his face was completely shrouded in fear, and his pupils were full of disbelief. The dozens of special police covered by the strong light lay on the ground and screamed in pain, as if their bodies were experiencing some kind of torture, rolling on the ground, and the pain made them roar uncontrollably. "Ah, my eyes, my eyes. I can't see anything, it hurts so much. My God, where are my hands, why are my hands gone?" All the SWAT officers struggled on the ground, their eyes completely white, rolling around like headless flies. The stinging pain in their bodies made them feel like dying. What scared Victor even more was that this group of SWAT officers were melting. Their bodies, like candles, began to melt drop by drop, and finally revealed the white skeleton underneath. Blood and flesh flowed on the road, and half of the bodies melted, half of the flesh and half of the bones struggled to crawl, like evil spirits in hell. The roar almost resounded through the sky. Oh my God. Victor couldn't help but open his eyes wide. Even though the strong light was blinding, he couldn't hide his shock. He stared at Logan, who was shining brightly, and said in disbelief, "What kind of ability is this?" Those people seemed to have all become candles. Logan was like the fire that lit the candles, melting everyone completely. This ability made Victor feel deeply disgusted, and he couldn't help but look down at his hands. He couldn't imagine what would happen if his body was also subjected to the same skill. His muscles flowed down like water, and he watched himself turn into a pile of bones. After a while, the screams stopped and the struggle ended. In front, the skeletons of dozens of special police were wrapped in police uniforms. Their flesh had already flowed all over the ground with blood. The cold skeletons made them look like long rotten corpses. "Huh!" A gasp interrupted Victor's shock, and he quickly turned his head to look at Logan. At this time, Logan's light had dissipated. He stood there gasping for breath, and the sticky blood gradually spread to his feet. Logan looked down at the miserable state of the special police, and was a little stunned for a moment. He didn't expect that this ability would be so powerful. It was simply a weapon for large-scale killing. However, the price was also obvious. At this time, his face was pale, and there was not a trace of strength left in his body, as if his body was drained, extremely weak, and he supported the armored vehicle with one hand to prevent himself from falling down. His legs were like lead, and he couldn't even lift them up. "Are you okay?" Victor noticed that something was wrong with Logan, and hurriedly got out of the car to support him. "It's okay, just rest for a while." Logan waved weakly. "Go back first." With Victor's support, Logan got into the car and slumped in the back seat, completely unable to move. It seems that this ability cannot be used easily. He took a deep breath and couldn't help muttering in his heart. Once this ability is used, he will completely lose any combat power. If there are still enemies, the other party can easily capture him. Victor drove recklessly, his feet almost welded to the accelerator, and the speed was so fast that he almost took off. All the vehicles along the way called him crazy and turned their heads to avoid him. After a while, the two finally returned to the camp. At this time, John and his friends had just arrived safely and were getting out of the car. They heard the sound of the car behind them, and hurriedly looked back. When they saw that it was Logan and his friends, they breathed a sigh of relief. Victor parked the car in front of the camp, and the two pushed the door and got out. John hurriedly came up and said excitedly, "You are okay, it's really great." These two people stayed to stop the enemy, and John had prepared for them to be arrested. He even planned to mobilize people to rescue them after returning to the shelter. Now seeing the two people return safely, the worries in his heart instantly dissipated, and he hurried to check whether the two were injured. "Thank you." Lorna also followed John and walked up to thank Logan. After all, if Logan and his friends hadn't rescued her, she would still be tortured by Anna and her gang. "No need to thank me." Logan waved his hand. After resting in the car, his physical strength had recovered a little. Now, except for his slightly pale face, he was fine. Looking at Lorna's emerald green hair, Logan smiled and said, "Your ability reminds me of an old friend." "Who?" Hearing this, Lorna asked curiously. She didn't know that her father was Magneto. Logan was about to speak, but was interrupted by a shout in the house. "My God, thank God, you are finally back." Caliban ran out of the wooden house with an excited look on his face. He was worried about the waiting time. After all, those who could take them to the shelter had left. If they didn't come back, he didn't know where to take the professor and the children. However, just halfway through the run, Caliban noticed Lorna next to Logan. He was suddenly stunned, and his body couldn't help shaking. He sniffed at Lorna, frowning and said, "This smell is too similar." "Who are you talking about?" Lorna couldn't help but speak. The conversation between the two people made her confused. "Magneto." Logan smiled, "An old friend of ours." "Magneto." Lorna murmured the name, and then shook her head and said, "I haven't heard of it. Can he control metal like me?" "Ah." Logan was silent for a while, not knowing how to answer for a while, and finally smiled and shook his head and said, "Let the professor explain this to you later, now we have to leave here quickly." Although they got rid of the pursuers, the guys in the picket team had better noses than dogs, and they could easily lock their positions through the traces left behind. They had to retreat quickly. John nodded, walked into the house, and shouted, "Everyone, pack up quickly. We have to leave now. Hurry up." A group of children heard his words and took action. They gathered their companions and started to pack up. Logan and Caliban also entered the wooden house and went upstairs to pick up the professor. Stepping on the creaking wooden stairs, Caliban couldn't help but look back at Lorna and whispered, "Is that girl really Magneto's daughter?" "Maybe," Logan said again. "You may ask the professor, he must know." "I think so too. My nose won't be wrong. Her breath is too similar to Magneto's," Caliban said with a worried look on his face. "That kind of ability makes me feel uncomfortable all over." "Don't worry, she won't hurt us," Logan comforted softly. Caliban still looked worried and couldn't help muttering, "I hope she won't become the next Magneto." Soon, the two came to the room and started packing. They didn't bring much stuff with them. Most of the useless stuff had been thrown away at the gathering point. Even the professor's wheelchair was thrown into a pile of weeds. Now they only brought some clothes and cash. Each person had a backpack full of all their belongings. Dong dong dong. Logan had just packed up when there was a knock on the door. When he opened the door, he saw Laura standing outside. The little girl raised her head and looked at him with a worried look on her face. When she saw that Logan was fine, she was relieved. She reached out and handed it over, holding 3 bottles of green serum. "This is an enhanced serum that can temporarily enhance the ability of the X gene." Lola explained what was in her hand, and added, "It was brought out from the laboratory when Carl and his team escaped. When we were in the laboratory before, those people often injected us with it, and it was indeed very effective." Logan looked at the serum and asked with a smile, "For us?" He naturally knew the role of these serums. For mutants, this thing can suddenly burst out with full strength in times of crisis, and it is definitely a weapon for counterattack in a war. Lola nodded. "Carl said that you need these things more than us. I hope you can use them at a critical moment. In this situation, these children are not of much help to the battle situation, and the serum is of no use to them. Instead, Logan and his team can exert the effect of the serum." "Thank you." Logan nodded and took the serum. Both he and Victor needed it. Laura smiled and added, "By the way, the amount of injection cannot be too much, otherwise it will damage the body's functions. If you are injured, you can inject a small amount to quickly restore your body and control." "I know." Logan put away the serum and rubbed Laura's head with a smile. "Have you packed your things?" Lola turned sideways and showed the backpack on her back. "We can set off at any time." Bang! At this time, gunshots suddenly came from outside. Logan's expression froze and he quickly looked out the window. At the same time, John downstairs shouted loudly, "Oh no, it's the patrol team, those guys are chasing us." Logan couldn't help but yelled in anger, and quickly pulled Laura outside the door into the house, and said, "You stay here to guard the professor, I'll go down and take a look." Lola also realized the seriousness of the matter and nodded seriously. Logan went downstairs quickly with a gloomy face. He didn't expect that the guys in the patrol team had such a sharp nose that they found their location so quickly. Downstairs, the wooden door had been shut tightly. John was standing in front of the window with a pistol in his hand. When he saw Logan coming down, he said solemnly, "They're coming." Logan leaned over to the window and looked out. At this time, the entire wooden house was surrounded by dense armor, and red and blue police lights kept flashing on the top of the armored vehicle. The fully armed special police got off the armored vehicle, each of them holding a variety of weapons, just like a huge anti-terrorist operation. Logan looked solemn and clenched his fist unconsciously. With so many people, even a fly might not be able to fly out. The perimeter of the house was full of armored vehicles with flashing police lights and noisy sirens. The heavily armed pickets surrounded the entire wooden house, and everyone was standing ready with their guns pointed at the entrances and exits of the wooden house. As long as anyone showed his head, he would be sieved by concentrated fire at the first time. "There are pickets all around, trying to trap us here." Logan leaned behind the window, leaned his head out slightly, and looked around with a solemn expression. There were densely packed pickets outside, roughly estimated to be at least several hundred people. The huge disparity in the number of people made Logan frown. Although there is a room full of mutants hidden here, only Logan and the others can actually fight. Let children with no combat experience fight with this group of highly qualified pickets, and the result will definitely be a disastrous defeat, especially since most of their abilities are still in their infancy. Moreover, Logan had just launched Annihilation and his physical strength had not fully recovered at this time, so he was unable to fight for a long time. In addition, Lorna's body is also very weak and cannot last long. With no hope of escape, Logan couldn't help but curse, with a stern look in his eyes. There is really no other way, so I can only inject the serum and use Annihilation. But once he uses Annihilation under the eyes of so many people, his awakening of new skills will no longer be a secret. Sooner or later, this news will be revealed. When the time comes, Wolverine will become a bounty hunter, the prey of various black markets and even Hydra, and his life will probably not be peaceful. How did they find this place? Victor came closer, his expression solemn. These pickets all have dog noses. As long as we leave any clues, they will be able to follow us. Klaus tightened his grip on the pistol. Buzz. Behind, a burst of green light flashed, and several people looked back, only to see Lorna clenching her teeth and trying to hold up a dagger in the air. The dagger trembled and levitated for a moment, but soon it seemed that she had lost her strength. Just like that, he landed quickly with a clang. Cough, cough, cough. The girl's face instantly turned pale, and she coughed violently uncontrollably. Her delicate features were tightly knitted together due to exhaustion, and her forehead was covered with beads of sweat. Kid, don't force it, Logan said to Lorna. Forcibly overexerting your physical strength will only make your physical condition worse. After comforting Lorna, he hurriedly asked John on the other side, don't you have support in your shelter? We can't break out now. John shook his head with a bitter look on his face, the shelter is too far away from here. Even if we get in touch with the shelter now, by the time support arrives, the wooden house will have been flattened. These words completely silenced several people in the room, and an atmosphere of despair quickly interweaved in the room. Without support, only death awaits everyone. At this moment, the noisy sirens outside suddenly stopped. The leader of the picket team held up an electronic horn and shouted to the wooden house, people inside, listen, you have been surrounded. Quickly put down your weapons, put your head in your hands and come out to surrender, otherwise there is only one way to die. Logan and the others looked at each other and did not respond to each other's words. If they surrender, there will only be one end, either they will be captured in a laboratory and used as experimental subjects for research, or they will be slapped with a restraining collar and spend their entire lives in prison. No matter which outcome, it will be more painful than death. I'll give you 1 minute, or we'll shoot. The leader spoke again, stretching out his arms and staring at the watch on his wrist. 1 minute passed quickly, and the team leader shouted impatiently, 1 minute is up, you asked for this, machine gunners, prepare. As soon as his voice fell, the men manning the heavy machine guns on the motorcycle turned their guns and pointed them at the wooden house. Get down quickly. When Logan saw this, his eyes suddenly shrank, and he waved his hand to tell everyone to lie down. Bang, bang, bang. As soon as he finished speaking, the machine gunner pulled the trigger without hesitation. The heavy machine gun spit out tongues of flame, and bullets poured out like a torrential rain. The powerful machine gun bullets instantly penetrated the wooden house. The walls were instantly riddled with holes, debris continued to fly, and dust flew everywhere. The sun shone in from the clear bullet holes, illuminating the house brightly. The wooden building shook violently, as if it would collapse at any time. A few minutes later, the gunfire finally stopped and the dust gradually dispersed. Logan, who was lying on the ground, couldn't help but let out a long breath. He quickly turned his head to look around, bent down to check on the others, you are all okay. Bar. Fine. John and others raised their heads and shook their heads. They all lay down in time just now, the bullet did not hit anyone, it just passed over the body. Unluckily, it was scratched, but it was not serious. The children in the corner were all safe and sound, but the fierce gunfire still made these little guys feel extremely frightened. They hugged each other and shivered. The timid ones were scared to tears, but they didn't dare to cry loudly. No bit his arm and sobbed softly. These beasts won't even spare the children. John had a sullen face and couldn't help but clenched his fist and pounded the floor hard. With so many children here, it was impossible for the pickets not to notice them, but even so, they still ordered the shooting without hesitation. They were really worse than beasts. If he hadn't dodged in time, John couldn't even imagine what the consequences would have been. I think you should know that there is no way to escape. The leader of the patrol team outside raised the megaphone again and shouted, and now it's just an appetizer. I'll give you another minute. If you don't come out, it won't be just these few shots. Lorna stood up angrily, biting her red lips and said coldly, I'll go and kill them. While speaking, her hands continued to gather green light, some metal products trembled, but her face gradually turned pale. Stop. Logan reached out and pulled her back, shaking his head and said, if you force your ability again, you will die here. Lorna's body can no longer withstand any overload. If she lets her go out, she may die of exhaustion before the enemy is completely eliminated. What should we do now? Lorna looked anxious. At this time, they had no other choice. Logan looked at everyone, then looked back at the group of children with terrified faces, took a long deep breath, slowly stood up, and said with determination in his eyes, then let me deal with them. What are you going to do? John noticed the look in Logan's eyes, which was a kind of determination to face death. I have lived for 200 years, long enough, and silent enough. I should do more for the younger generation. Logan took a deep breath, a glimmer in his eyes, looked at the pickets outside, and said in an extremely cold voice, it's time to let these beasts see what fear from the depths of the soul is. Logan took a deep breath and slowly walked towards the door. Although I understand that my abilities may be exposed, there seems to be no better way at the moment. If I don't take action, I'm afraid everyone will die here. However, at this time, an old voice came from upstairs, Logan, let me do it. Everyone looked back and saw that Charles was being helped downstairs by Laura and Caliban. He was nearly 100 years old, his body was trembling, his arms were shaking unconsciously, and his wrinkled face was covered with age spots. Professor. Logan looked at Charles in surprise, his brows knitted together. He knows the professor's ability. If the professor takes action, these people outside will not be a problem at all. But the problem is that Charles's Alzheimer's disease has become more and more serious in recent years. He must use drugs to maintain consciousness. It is difficult to control his abilities and it is extremely easy to lose control. We must know that once an out-of-control outbreak occurs and is not contained in time, it will only bring greater disaster. Logan, your newly awakened ability must not be seen by so many people. Unless it is absolutely necessary, do not expose it. The professor's voice suddenly sounded deep in Logan's mind, and no one else heard it. Logan understood that this was the professor using telepathy to talk to him. The professor's voice came again, and he said seriously, besides, we have just met John and the others, and we don't know their character well. If your story is spread, I'm afraid it will cause a lot of trouble, so let me do it. Logan frowned and hesitated. After all, Charles's physical condition was too bad. Others also looked at the professor in astonishment, with doubts on their faces. Although they all know how terrifying the professor was in the past, that was more than 10 years ago, and the professor now is an old man in his dying years. Professor, we all know how powerful you were when you were young, but now. Klaus glanced at the army outside and hesitated. There are too many of them. Can you still activate your abilities in your current situation? If it was young Charles, they would not dare to question it. As for now, no one would believe that such an old man could deal with hundreds of heavily armed pickets. Charles smiled slightly and said, isn't there also an enhancement serum? I believe that thing is enough for me to solve these troubles. Don't worry, as long as I restore my abilities a little, it will be more than enough to deal with the guys outside. Professor, are you sure? Logan hesitantly handed over the serum. The enhanced serum can indeed allow mutants to recover quickly. In theory, a small dose of injection will not cause any big problems, but it will definitely have some negative effects. At the professor's current age, even a small impact may cause irreversible damage to him. Charles nodded lightly and smiled. Logan, I am old, but I am not useless. You should let me play some role. Besides, there is no other way now, right? After speaking, he waved his hand, signaling Caliban to inject himself with the serum. Caliban hesitated for a moment, looked at the professor, then at Logan, and finally glanced at the pickets outside the room. In the end, he could only nod with a helpless sigh, took the serum, stuck it on Charles's neck, and injected it 1/3. With the injection of green serum, Charles's rickety body quickly became rosy with the naked eye, and his entire spiritual temperament seemed to come alive at this moment. The deep blue eyes shrank quickly, as if from a flame that was about to go out at any moment. It completely burned into a cluster of flames. The power of the crazy increase made Charles exhale a long and comfortable breath, with a face intoxicated as he sensed the gradually active X gene in his body. This feeling was really fascinating. The familiar feeling is back. Charles clenched his fists slightly and spoke with a relieved expression. This was the happiest day he had felt in his career for more than 10 years. It was as if everything in the world was back under his control. "They're coming." John suddenly pointed out the window, his expression changing. The pickets seemed to have given up on machine gun fire, and instead dispatched several troops to approach the wooden house from all directions. They saw that they were only about 100 meters away from the wooden house. "It seems they want to catch a few alive and take them back." Klaus revealed the intention of these people in one word and kept chattering. "Yes, we have a lot of little guys here. In their eyes, they are perfect experimental subjects. Their laboratory is in great need of little ones." "Shut up, Klaus." Lorna glared at Klaus fiercely, and then quickly comforted the children. "Don't worry, we won't let these fools take you away." But even so, the sounds of sobbing from the children continued to be heard. The laboratory was the source of nightmares for them, and the atmosphere of fear spread rapidly. Klaus realized that he had talked too much and quickly shut up. The episode here did not have any impact on Charles. He closed his eyes tightly and carefully felt the power flowing in his body, with intoxication written on his face. "Professor, are you okay?" Logan looked at Charles worriedly. He could feel the turbulent aura in Charles's body, and he was a little worried that the professor could not control these powers. "Never felt so good." Charles slowly opened his eyes. There was no longer any fatigue in his blue eyes. He stared at the army outside with vigor. Deep in his eyes, he seemed to be a little eager to try. He couldn't wait to test this long-lost strength. Thinking, he stretched out his fingers and put them on his temples. His mind quickly emptied, and he closed his eyes slightly. His thoughts were like invisible sound waves scattering, and everything around him seemed to emerge in his mind. Those heavily armed special police pickets, those powerful armored vehicles, and even the small insects shivering in the grass all appeared in the back of his mind. These things are like puppets on strings. As long as he wants, he can even make them make any movements he wants. Now, he is like the god of this world, dominating everything here. What a nostalgic move. Caliban, who was on the side, supported the professor and couldn't help but sigh when he saw Charles's actions. "When was the last time you saw Charles doing this?" He couldn't tell. It was a long time ago anyway, and seeing Charles's movements now gave him a feeling that the memory deep in his mind overlapped with reality. At the same time, the pickets outside stopped in unison, squatting on the ground one by one, looking around warily. At this time, they all felt that there seemed to be a pair of dangerous eyes in the dark, watching them from an invisible place. This feeling was like being followed by a wild beast that could pounce on them and bite them at any time. The strong uneasiness in their hearts made them squat on the spot and look around, frowning. "Captain, something seems not right." One team member couldn't help but speak, and the uneasiness in his heart became stronger as time went by. The leader who was walking at the end of the team had the same feeling in his heart. But after checking around, he found nothing strange. He frowned and said, "What are you afraid of? They are just a group of beasts trapped in a cage. There will be nothing wrong with them." Threatening, "Keep pushing forward, try to keep as many people alive as possible." "Yes." The team members responded in panic, then stood up again and continued towards the cabin. But as soon as he took 2 steps, his body suddenly froze. Behind the bullet holes in the wall of the wooden house, he vaguely saw a pair of old blue eyes. The deep eyes were like blue black holes, as if they could swallow everything. Buzz. The next second, there was a sudden buzzing in his mind. It was as if all his consciousness had been wiped out at this moment. His mind went blank and he froze on the ground. Not only him, but also his team, all stood upright on the spot, as if they had become several living wooden stakes. When the captain who was standing in the distance controlling the battle situation saw this scene, he couldn't help frowning, picked up the communicator and shouted loudly, "Group 3, what's going on? Keep moving forward, don't stop without my order." But what responded to him was silence. The entire team members seemed to have not heard his words at all, and just stood there blankly. Seeing this scene, the captain suddenly felt a little uneasy in his heart. Just as he was about to send someone over to check, an even more frightening scene appeared. Other teams also stopped one after another. After a while, all the teams seemed to have completely turned into wooden figures, standing there blankly, and there was absolute silence outside the wooden house. Through the bullet holes in the wooden house, John kept glancing at the picket SWAT policemen who looked like wooden men, with an expression gradually astonished. They all stopped. He understood that this was all due to Charles. For a moment, he was in awe of the old man with his eyes tightly closed. At the same time, there is also some fear. Anyone who is targeted will be turned into a piece of fish and allowed to be slaughtered. Call. On the other side, Lorna breathed a deep sigh of relief, and the crisis was temporarily resolved. She couldn't help but look back at Charles, and suddenly felt that Charles's abilities were somewhat similar to hers, except that she controlled metal, while he controlled people, and the latter was obviously more terrifying. The eyes of the children around him were full of curiosity. Although they had read about Professor Logan and Caliban, on the other hand, looked worried. They could see that they themselves felt uncomfortable because the professor controlled so many people. His eyes were closed, his brows were furrowed, his head was covered with sweat, and his body was shaking uncontrollably. It looked very laborious. Obviously, so many years of decadence made it difficult for him to directly return to his peak state. Even if he was facing only 100 ordinary humans, he was still exhausted. Laura, who was supporting the professor on the other side, looked extremely worried at this time. She took out a handkerchief and gently wiped Charles's falling sweat beads, and couldn't help but said, "Is the dose too high?" "Shish." Before she could finish speaking, Logan quickly put his finger to his lips and whispered, "Don't disturb him." This is the critical moment for the professor to activate his abilities. If he is interrupted and all his previous efforts are wasted, he himself will probably be counterattacked, causing irreversible damage. Today's professors cannot bear any backlash. Bang! Suddenly, the silence outside the wooden house was broken by a burst of gunfire. The fierce gunfire was like thunder, and gunpowder smoke filled the air. Everyone looked shocked and hurriedly ran away, but then they discovered that the wooden house had no traces of gunshots at all. They poked their heads out in confusion and looked outside, but the scene outside made people instantly stunned and speechless. At this time, all the pickets seemed like lifeless puppets. They turned around and pointed at the leader at the rear. They kept pulling the rifles in their hands and shooting in the direction of the leader with no expression on their faces. It was like raindrops of bullets, whizzing towards the leader. Fark. The leader was shocked and realized that these people were controlled. He rolled over and hid behind the armored vehicle, avoiding the baptism of this round of bullets. At this moment, he was completely panicked. After glancing at the wooden house and the group of numb team members, his face turned completely pale and he hurriedly got up to escape. But before the leader could run, he suddenly bumped into a tall subordinate and fell heavily to the ground. At this time, the subordinate's eyes were completely unconscious, leaving only an angry face, looking down at him. The leader was panicked and looked at the appearance of this loyal subordinate. He realized that there must be a psychic mutant in the wooden house. He controlled all his soldiers. At this moment, these subordinates became his enemies. In an instant, the leader's face was ashen, and the whole person couldn't help trembling. At this moment, he understood that the current situation was no longer under his control. He had to call for support and even apply for missiles to bomb the wooden house. Psychic mutants are always the most disgusting and fearful mutants. After the leader glanced at the wooden house in panic, he quickly got up from the ground and ran back without hesitation. As soon as he stood up, he found that all the soldiers had surrounded him. The soldiers looked numb, like puppets without any consciousness, silently forming a circle to trap themselves in the middle and constantly approaching him. The rifles with all the bullets in their hands were thrown away, and they approached the leader with bare hands. After a while, the leader was completely trapped by them on the flat ground of less than 1 square meter, surrounded by dense pickets without leaving a gap. What are you going to do? The leader was completely panicked, shouting with fear, and even because of fear, his voice couldn't stop trembling. But no one gave him any response. Hundreds of eyes just stared at him, without any emotion. Wake up quickly. The leader roared in despair, and couldn't help but slap a member of the picket in front of him hard. The heavy palm force instantly made the team member's face turn red, but he still did not react and continued to stare at the leader in a daze. The next moment, everyone reached for the pistol holsters on their waists at the same time. Everyone's movements were like a pre-programmed program, neat and uniform, and such neat movements even had some weird beauty. Click. All the soldiers pulled the bolts to load their pistols. Looking at these hundreds of pistols, the leader was completely panicked and stepped back subconsciously, but just after taking 2 steps back, he bumped into the dazed team members behind him, and bounced back again as if he was electrocuted. The fear in his heart almost drove him crazy. Soon, those team members raised their loaded pistols, but they did not aim at him, but all raised their heads slightly and put the muzzles of the guns against their chins. "Don't!" the leader roared in horror, and his lower limbs couldn't help trembling. Bang bang bang. The only response to him was fierce gunfire. All the bullets instantly penetrated the heads of these team members. Blood and brain matter spurted out from the top of their heads like a volcanic eruption, as if a bloody rain had fallen. The warm red blood splashed on the leader's face, dyeing him completely red. The surrounding soil also turned into a pool of red soil because of the irrigation of blood. The strong smell of blood spread and could not be dissipated for a long time. Bang bang bang. These suicide team members fell to the ground one after another, and their bodies lay on the ground in rows, like a mass grave. Looking at this horrific scene, the leader's legs softened and he collapsed to the ground, almost going crazy. And this scene really scared John and the others in the room. Everyone's breathing could not help but stagnate, and they turned back to look at Charles in horror again. Even Klaus, who usually talks a lot, was scared and shut his mouth this time. At this time, Charles put down his hand like he was exhausted, and slowly opened his eyes. His blue pupils were full of fatigue. He seemed to have drained all his strength. He gasped heavily, and beads of sweat kept falling on his head. It seemed that an extremely violent breath was rising in his body. Seeing this, Logan quickly took out the tranquilizer and injected a shot into Charles's arm. As the drug took effect, Charles's physical condition gradually stabilized. This is what Logan was worried about. Charles's brain disease is getting worse. After activating his ability, he is likely to become unstable and may even accidentally hurt his own people. Fortunately, the tranquilizer can still relieve his symptoms this time. We have to leave quickly. Charles waved his hand weakly. In those people's memory, there are still many patrol teams outside to surround us. If we don't leave now, it will be too late. John nodded, signaled all the children to carry their school bags and prepare to evacuate, while he took out his pistol and said fiercely, "Before leaving, we have to deal with one person." While speaking, he looked at the leader who was sitting in a pool of blood outside, still in shock. Charles shook his head and stopped him. "Keep him first, he has a lot of information, maybe he can lead us to bypass the search of the patrol team." This is why he kept the leader. Hearing this, John nodded, quickly put away his pistol, and strode towards the leader with his men. At this time, the leader was sitting in a pool of blood, and the fear in his heart made him gasp uncontrollably. After noticing the footsteps behind him, he turned his head in fear and saw Logan and others staring at him. "Don't kill me, don't kill me." The team leader moved back in panic, completely frightened. John looked at him, snorted disdainfully, strode up, grabbed his collar angrily, pulled him up, and said sternly, "Get up, lead the way." Chapter 91. The jailbreak and the death of a large number of patrol team members have obviously completely angered local officials. In particular, the release of hundreds of serious criminals and mutants is undoubtedly a trampling on the face of government officials. On this day, the entire border area and its surrounding areas were on high alert. At the instruction of local government officials, all patrol team vacations were cancelled, all members were recalled, and all other ongoing tasks were shelved. The entire patrol team, plus the special police department, and even a small number of local garrisons, all participated in the encirclement and suppression of Logan and others. The entire city and its surrounding areas were almost sealed off. Even in the jungles where few people go, there are patrol teams constantly investigating. Under this dragnet, Logan and others are undoubtedly in an extremely dangerous situation. Every step has to be extremely careful. If you are not careful, you will fall into the abyss completely. In such a situation, the two-person exploration team composed of Logan and Victor can be said to be really walking on the edge of a knife. They were almost hit by the patrol team several times, and thanks to their timely response, they were able to escape danger. Fortunately, the leader they caught was a complete coward. Under the threat of death, Logan and his men easily got the information about the deployment of the patrol team and the time when patrol teams passed through some remote areas from him. Relying on this information, Logan and his men chose a relatively safe route and drove out of the search area without any danger. After leaving the search area, they did not dare to stop and drove fast on the road. After running hundreds of kilometers, they took a break on a rugged mountain road with few people. "Now you are safe, there is no point in keeping me. Can you let me go?" The leader, who was pressed in the back seat of the car, looked at Logan and John sitting on both sides carefully and spoke tremblingly. Logan did not speak, but just glanced at John, indicating that he should make a decision. John nodded very readily, pushed open the car door, and said lightly, "Let's go." The leader was stunned when he saw this, as if he didn't expect Logan and the others to let him go, and he didn't come back to his senses for a while. On the other side, Logan stretched out his steel claws and cut the ropes tied to his hands and feet. The leader looked at his suddenly relaxed hands and feet, and then looked at the car door. His eyes suddenly flashed, and he ran out of the car without hesitation, running wildly on the road as if escaping, as fast as a cheetah. Suddenly, a dagger pierced his chest from the back, and the stinging pain of a broken heart made him stop immediately, and he looked down at the tip of the sword emerging from his chest in disbelief. Crack! Lorna in the car stretched out her hand, and the dagger flew out of the leader's chest and returned to her palm. Looking at the red blood on the dagger, she snorted softly, "You can go now." As the dagger was recalled, the leader's chest spurted out hot blood. When he was left behind, he couldn't help but look back at the vehicle behind him. His vision gradually blurred, as if he was cursing this group of people for not keeping their promises, and then he fell heavily to the ground, and the blood completely dyed the ground red. "We are not breaking our promises. He is really gone forever." Logan looked at the corpse, smiled and shook his head, took a piece of paper and handed it to Lorna, indicating that she should wipe the sword. What a humorous cold joke. Lorna wiped the dagger carefully, never letting the dirty blood remain on her sword. Since he ignored the children and ordered the wooden house to be shot, he was doomed to end up like this. John snorted coldly. They have never been a charity organization. How could they really let go of such a scum who didn't even let go of the children? They will not be merciful to their enemies. After solving this problem, Logan and his men got off the car. On the flat ground on the other side, the children gathered together to simply replenish food and water. Because they had just experienced a life and death escape, the psychological fear made these children unusually well behaved. They ate their food honestly and even spoke less. "Everyone, it's time to get on the road. We still have a long way to go." John clapped his hands, signaled the children to finish their meal, and arranged for them to get on the car. There were more than 20 children, and it took 3 vans to fill them. These 3 vans were robbed by Logan and his men. After all, they were escaping, and driving the bulletproof car of the patrol team was too conspicuous, so Logan, Victor and John rushed to a car dealership in the suburbs and robbed 3 vans. In fact, it can't be said to be robbed. Before leaving, John left more than 10 patrol guns to the people in the car dealership. The price of those things on the black market is much higher than these 3 vans. After calling all the children into the car, Logan and Victor sat in the driver's seat and the co-pilot's seat of the lead car respectively. They were responsible for the professor and 6 or 7 children in this car. Behind, John and Lorna were in charge of one car, and Klaus and Caliban were in charge of another. Except for refueling, the 3 cars almost never stopped and rushed to the shelter in Canada at full speed. As John said, the journey to the shelter was very long, and in order to avoid pursuit, they could only walk on the rugged mountain road, try to avoid the mainland, and avoid contact with the police who were checking. Finally, the vehicle drove into the big forest in the north and kept shuttling through the woodland. Alberta. In the main driver's seat, Victor noticed the road sign on the side of the road and almost subconsciously recited the place name on the road sign. He couldn't help turning his head and smiled at Logan. "Jimmy, we're back in Alberta." Alberta. This name made Logan feel a little dazed. In the back of his mind, the memory belonging to Wolverine kept replaying the past because of the appearance of this place name. Alberta, that farm in Edmonton, and that bloody night. This is definitely the most unforgettable place in Wolverine's life and the starting point of his legend. The story here is really unforgettable. I never thought we could come back here. Victor looked at the surrounding environment, couldn't help laughing, and said with some emotion, I really don't know if the farm at that time is still there. Even if it is here, it probably belongs to someone else. I don't know who Mr. Howlett inherited it from. Logan looked out the window and spoke calmly. Although he had not personally experienced that past event, he had a deep memory of Wolverine's past. You'll know when you have time to go and see it. Victor smiled and shrugged. When we come to the shelter, I think the safety problem will be much smaller. I believe we will have time to revisit our old place. Logan couldn't help but turned around in surprise and asked in disbelief, you actually want to go back? This farm left Victor with a bad memory. All he felt here was humiliation and injustice. Logan thought he would hate this place. Why not? Victor smiled at Logan, and then breathed a deep sigh of relief, as if he had looked away, and as if he had said goodbye to the past time completely. He smiled and said, time will smooth everything out, won't it? Including me. I have been humiliated, and the person who humiliated me has long since passed away. Even if I want to hate him, I don't know who to hate. Quote. Logan looked surprised. He really didn't expect Victor to be so open-minded. But if you think about it carefully, for them, that happened nearly 200 years ago. 200 years is enough to make up for any trauma. Just as Logan was sighing, the voice of John from the car in front suddenly came over the intercom. Everyone, we're getting ready. It's in the woods ahead. It's finally here. I'm almost suffocating in the car. Caliban's response came out immediately, and from his voice, it was not difficult to hear the joy in his heart. Obviously, this whole journey was really torture for him. After putting down the walkie-talkie, Caliban couldn't help but sniff it, his eyes flashing with excitement. It seems that your shelter is indeed safe. I feel the scent of many mutants. I haven't smelled so many of the same kind in a long time. Klaus, who was next to him, couldn't help but smile when he saw this, and said, your sensing range is not small. It seems that it will be much easier for us to find mutants in the future. After talking along the way, Klaus also learned about Caliban's ability. This ability to search for mutants is indeed useless for combat, but it is indeed a unique skill when used to search for mutants. Under the leadership of John, the convoy passed through the dense woods in front and finally stopped at a small farm by the river. Surrounded by mountains and forests, the air is fresh, the birds are chirping, the place is remote and quiet, and it feels like a paradise. Logan parked the vehicle and looked around at the beautiful scenery. He couldn't help but think that if no one disturbed him, it would be a good choice to retire here. Everyone opened the car door and got out of the car, and stretched their bodies happily by the river. Running all the way made their bones creak when they moved. At this time, a group of people suddenly rushed out of the farm. They were of different ages and skin colors, but they all held long guns in their hands and looked at Logan and the others with vigilance. Don't be nervous, it's me, I brought people back. John, who was in the car in front, saw this and hurriedly got out of the car and spoke to these people. After seeing John, these people's alertness suddenly disappeared and they quickly put away their guns. You are finally back. One of the men breathed a deep sigh of relief. Immediately he looked around anxiously. Where's Lorna? Marcus, I'm here. Lorna pushed the professor towards Marcos. After seeing that Lorna was safe and sound, Marcus breathed a long sigh of relief, and then he let go of his worries. He immediately looked at the professor and asked in surprise, is this the Professor X you mentioned in the email? Before returning, they sent an email to the shelter to inform them of their experiences along the way and ask them to prepare a place for Logan and others. It's not just professors. Lorna smiled and introduced Logan, who was coming from behind, and Wolverine, Logan. Guys, welcome to join the shelter. Marcus enthusiastically went up to shake hands with Logan. I hope you can adapt to the environment here. He had already heard about the names of Wolverine and Professor. Thank you for taking us in. Logan responded with a smile. Marcus waved his hand quickly. We are all members of the tribe, so there is no need to be so polite. The purpose of our shelter is to protect the tribe. The more mutants who join, the better. As he said that, he glanced at the professor, Victor, and Caliban, and said, "The leader of our sanctuary, Micah, knows that you are coming and has been preparing to receive you early in the morning. I will take you to meet him first." Quote. Logan nodded. "Okay. It is obviously necessary to come to other people's territory and meet the leader here. In his words before traveling, it is to pay homage to the mountain gate." Even if Marcus didn't say it, he would still bring up the idea of meeting the leader. Marcus nodded happily, turned to Lorna and said, "I'll take them there first, and you take care of these children." After saying that, he led Logan and others into the farm, came to a small building in the center of the farm, and met Micah. "Wolverine, I finally meet you. Your legendary experience sounds as legendary as a history book." Micah is a bearded man with sharp eyes, like a rancher wearing a cowboy hat. He shakes hands with Logan enthusiastically. Then he turned to look at the professor in the wheelchair. "Professor Charles, it's great to see you. You are simply my idol. I have read some of your research works on the X gene. Although it is a bit obscure, it has definitely opened the door to my understanding of the X gene, and you can even be regarded as my teacher." Seeing Micah's attitude, Victor couldn't help but lean into Logan's ear and said with a smile, "You have so many fans. You can meet them here. You can see them everywhere." Logan rolled his eyes, signaled him to stop talking, and then responded with a smile, "Thank you for taking me in. If there is anything I need at the shelter in the future, you can just ask. As long as I can help, I won't do anything. Will refuse. We will talk about these things later. I believe that this big family at the shelter will make you feel happy and safe." Micah waved his hands and responded with a smile, and then spoke again. "I read the email sent back by John and the others. It made me sweat. Fortunately, there was no danger, but you must be exhausted too. I'll give it to you. You have prepared your shelter and let Marcos take you there. Of course, I should have introduced you to the shelter, but I'm really sorry. I'm still busy with some things right now, so I can only excuse you. I'll talk to you later. Chatting with you." Logan nodded. "In that case, I won't bother you. Anyway, we have many opportunities to chat here. Yeah, bye." Micah waved at them. Marcos took Logan and the others to their residence. As they passed through the farm on the way, he briefly introduced the current situation of the farm. This farm is run by everyone, and it is also one of the main sources of shelter. We live there, in the wooden house on the north side. It is very convenient to visit and chat when we are bored. Marcos pointed to a wooden house in the distance. "It looks very cozy." Logan pushed the professor, looked at the wooden houses and nodded. "Of course." Marcus smiled, and then he seemed to have thought of something, and said again, "By the way, for safety reasons, there are some rules in the shelter that we still have to abide by. Here, we don't have to cook. There are special meals are served in the canteen, which is distributed per person. No, the canteen is not far from the wooden house, which is very convenient." Quote. "By the way, one more thing, you can't go out at will after 10 o'clock in the evening. You need to report every night, and you must also report and apply when you go out. After all, it is for safety reasons. I hope you can understand and comply, otherwise the shelter may be closed. It's hard to accept. After all, the stricter the rules, the better the security. If it's messy, it's easy to get messed up." Marcos pondered the rules for supplementing the shelter. Logan nodded repeatedly. "Don't worry, we won't break the rules." Marcus smiled and nodded, and soon led a few people to a duplex wooden house. He pointed at the wooden house and said with a smile, "This is your future home. I wish you a happy stay. You have a good rest first, and I will no need to interrupt. See you at dinner." "Good." Logan nodded and looked at the wooden house up and down. The structure of this wooden house was good, he liked it very much, and it was at the edge of the house. It had good ventilation and lighting. On the side, there is a row of identical wooden houses, which look very neat. "Let's go. I'm exhausted today. I can fall asleep just lying on the bed." Victor yawned and pushed open the door of the cabin. Obviously, Micah arranged for someone to clean it, and it was very clean overall. Although the decoration was very simple, it was a wooden house after all, and the simple decoration gave it a retro feel. The room in the wooden house is enough for each of them, and the water and electricity supply are complete. There is even hot water in the shower room. Logan and the others simply tidied it up, made the bed, hung the clothes they brought in the closet, and laid out all the daily necessities. After all the actions, the cabin really felt like a home. After dealing with it casually, everyone was exhausted. After carrying the professor to his own bed, they all went back to their rooms to rest. I went back to the room and closed the door. Fatigue hit me instantly. After taking a comfortable hot bath in the toilet, I lay on the bed. However, I didn't rest directly. Instead, I started to think about the attribute panel. Endurance 6, Strength 8, Agility 7, Speed 9, Intelligence 5, Defense 7, Willpower 10, Fighting Skills 7, Prestige 191, Special Attributes none yet, Special Abilities Self-Healing Factor, Heat Vision, Annihilation. Current physical condition is gradually improving. Free points 17, enhancement points 11, the free points are actually 17. Logan looked at the column of free points in surprise. Since he always wanted to save this thing for critical moments, he rarely used it to increase attributes. But I didn't expect that I would accumulate so much without realizing it. And there are 11 enhancement points, which is definitely a lot of money. Logan recalled the battle experience that just happened, and murmured, "It seems that most of these points were added when saving Luna. Staying with the tribe is indeed a good choice. Even the points can increase so much in a short time." Thinking about it, Logan added all the enhancement points to the self-healing factor without hesitation. Now, in addition to the steel claws, his attack methods also include heat vision and annihilation, which are enough for the enemy. Instead, the self-healing factor in defense urgently needs to be enhanced. As the points increase, a sense of pleasure instantly fills the whole body, just like jumping into a pool suddenly on a hot summer day, feeling comfortable from the inside out, and the soreness of the whole body gradually dissipated. Logan couldn't help moving his limbs, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise. At this time, he noticed that the physical condition on the panel had also changed. The physical condition is normal, and the X gene is gradually recovering. Looking at this line of words, Logan's heart was shocked. This means that his self-healing factor is about to return to its peak. Feeling the comfort from inside out, Logan let out a long breath of comfort. He knew very well that his self-healing factor would soon return to its peak state. When the self-healing factor is fully restored, coupled with the skills of thermal vision and annihilation, at least self-protection will be no problem. By then, there will be no need to be so timid as now. This kind of life like a street rat should also come to an end. Logan's mouth corners raised, and then his eyes shifted to the new ability of annihilation. The last time he awakened thermal vision, he broke through 10 points of prestige. As for the awakening of annihilation this time, Logan believed that it was because the prestige broke through 100 points, but he was not sure. After all, the prestige value grew too fast at that time, and he did not notice at what point the new skill was awakened. But if it is really a new ability awakened when breaking through 100 points, then it is 10 times more than the last time. By analogy, the third awakening of a new ability requires 1,000 points of prestige, and the fourth is 10,000 points, and the fifth is 100,000. Thinking of this, Logan suddenly collapsed. According to this inference, even if he obtains the prestige of all mutants in the world, he may not be able to awaken a few skills. For a moment, Logan was a little disappointed. Not to mention the tens of thousands of prestige points later, he has not even broken through 1,000 points of prestige. After all, it is less than 200 points now, and the hope of awakening the third ability seems to be invisible in a short time. After a long breath, Logan couldn't help shaking his head, but soon regained his confidence again. Awakening ability is secondary. The important thing is the enhancement points and free points. These two items are the absolute factors that affect one's combat power. As long as there are enough points, one has the possibility of unlimited evolution. Enhancement points can enhance one's abilities infinitely, such as heat vision. If enhanced to a certain extent, the heat vision released can even penetrate the entire sun. Once annihilation is enhanced to the extreme, Logan believes that the entire universe, no, all life forms in all parallel universes, are all in his control. As long as he is willing, all life forms will be completely melted under annihilation. And all of this requires enhancement points. Without enhancement points, all his skills, including the self-healing factor, can play a very limited role. The number of abilities is not the key, but the power of the ability and the proficiency of control. As long as it is enhanced to the extreme, even if only one ability is relied on, he can also break out of his illustrious reputation. You should know that Omega mutants usually reach the ceiling with a single ability, but just like that, they are also top-level existences. Similarly, the same is true for free points. As long as you accumulate free points and enhance your own attributes, once you enhance to a certain extent, you can also achieve a qualitative leap. Even if you don't rely on mutant abilities, he can even become a god on Earth with just physical fitness. The increase in points is a visible and tangible improvement. As for new abilities, Logan thinks it is better not to expect too much. I was lucky the first 2 times and awakened good abilities, which is indeed exciting. But these things are likely to be random. If you blindly pursue new abilities, and wait until the next time you finally get 1,000 points of prestige, the awakened ability is useless. For example, the kind that makes you grow thorns all over your body, it will be really disappointing. So points are the main way to enhance yourself in a short period of time. Thinking of this, Logan locked his eyes on the 17 free points. These free points have been stored before. Except for the time when he rescued Laura, he was reluctant to use the rest. Now that he has entered the shelter, he is safe in the short term and does not need to consider too many emergencies. It is time to properly enhance the attributes. Otherwise, even if these points are stored more, if they cannot be enhanced, it is useless. Logan scanned the various attributes and whispered, which one should I add? 17 points of free points, no matter which one is added, can bring a qualitative leap to that attribute. But after a little thought, Logan finally decided that it would be better to develop all aspects. Anyway, there are enough points to upgrade all his attributes. He did it right away. Logan did not hesitate to add 10 points to each of the attributes such as strength, agility, speed, defense, etc. As the points increased, Logan instantly felt that his muscles were recast. His body was constantly tense, and his muscles evolved rapidly under his skin. In just a moment, the density of his muscles was qualitatively enhanced. Logan couldn't help but touch his arm, feeling the new changes in his body. At this moment, the huge biceps felt as hard as iron. Looking at the situation on his body, he couldn't help but smile. Now his body density can completely resist the shooting of most small-caliber pistols. Bullets with less penetrating power can't break through his body at all, and will only be stuck in the muscles. In addition, the increase in strength is also very obvious. He can clearly feel the surging power in his body, like a volcano ready to burst out, as if there is endless strength in his body. He looked around and saw a section of steel pipe in the corner of the room. He couldn't help but step forward and hold it in his hand. With a little force, 5 clear palm indentations appeared on this smooth steel pipe. And he didn't even use much force. In addition, the increase in speed was also very significant. He walked to the window, opened the curtains and looked out at the beautiful mountain forest. The birds flashing in the sky seemed to him much slower than usual, as if they were clicking. Just like the slow playback, Logan could clearly see the movement of its wings and its flight path. In the distant flowers, he could clearly see the wings of each bee. Many details that were usually difficult to detect were clearly visible in this slow playback. And not only the eyes can see clearly, but even the hearing has become stronger due to the increase in agility. The chirping of the chicks in the bird's nest on the distant tree also seems extremely clear at this moment. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and squeezed, and a noisy fly was instantly caught between his 2 fingers. Looking at the fly struggling between his fingers, Logan smiled happily again. Nowadays, both physical fitness, senses and speed have been improved at least 3 times compared to before. You know, these attributes are good in themselves, but now they have suddenly increased 3 times. It can be said to be a qualitative change, and the whole person is as if he has been reborn. Shaking the flies away from his fingers, Logan closed the curtains and sat back on the bed. After upgrading, there are now only 4 free points left. Logan looked at the 2 attributes that did not add points at the end, which were fighting skills and intelligence. His fighting skills are naturally comparable. Even if he has not been upgraded, he still has a full 7 points. You know, 7 points is already very high, definitely a world-class level. The talent of this body is not high, but the fighting skills have been accumulated and tempered for hundreds of years. As for the latter's intelligence, it was only 5 points. Logan looked at that column and raised his eyebrows. It seems that not everything in this attribute panel is correct, and sometimes the data is wrong. How could my intelligence only be 5 points? This is absolutely false. Logan did not hesitate to increase his fighting skills to 10 points. In an instant, richer fighting skills and experience flooded into his mind. Many moves against enemies and subconscious reactions when encountering emergencies have been enhanced with the increase of points. Now, even if he is allowed to fight more than a dozen people with his bare hands, elite special forces will be able to fight in close quarters with ease. Now that there are only a few free points left, Logan has also set his sights on the last bit of intelligence. He does not think that intelligence here refers to the degree of intelligence. It is not that he is conceited, but that he feels that his IQ should not be only 5 points. The intelligence here should be a value related to knowledge and spirituality. If he reaches the top, he will be an omniscient person, and maybe like the professor, he can control others with his thoughts, and he will gain a certain amount of spiritual defense. For example, even the professor cannot easily control himself. However, Logan believes that at this stage, this improvement will not have much effect on him. Intellectual requirements do not mean that 1 point or 10 points can have a big impact. If you want to significantly improve your intelligence, you probably need to invest countless free points. Now Logan doesn't have that much time to devote to improving his intelligence. Other attributes are obviously more important at this stage. But he added the last bit to intelligence. As he expected, there were no significant changes. Boom, boom, boom. There was a knock on the door suddenly, followed by Lorna's voice. Logan, the cafeteria is open, it's dinner time. Come here. Logan quickly covered up his thoughts, stood up and opened the door, followed Lorna to wake up the others, moved the professor into the wheelchair, and headed to the cafeteria together. Our canteen opens and ends on time. You have to remember the opening time in the future, otherwise you will have nothing to eat if you miss it. Lorna led the way, while not forgetting to look back and remind a few people. Under her leadership, several people came to the so-called canteen. It was a very simple place, made entirely of iron sheets. Although it was built very large, the facilities were very simple, with only rows of tables and chairs, and almost no decorations. Good quality, very simple. At this time, the room was already full of people, chatting away. Several ceiling fans hanging overhead were slowly turning, and the breeze they brought was unable to dispel the stuffy heat in the room. Lorna led them to sit down at a few empty tables, smiled and said, "Now in the entire sanctuary, including you, there are a total of 131 mutants, except for a few who need to stand guard outside the farm. Outside, it's basically all here." Logan glanced around. These mutants were of different ages. The older ones were in their 50s and 60s, while the younger ones were only about 2 or 3 years old. Sitting one by one in the tin canteen, we didn't feel tired. Instead, we laughed happily while talking. Logan looked at this scene and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The external environment was turbulent, and both the government and the citizens were very malicious towards mutants. For mutants, having such an environment suitable for survival and mutual dependence can indeed be said to be the Garden of Eden. Just as Logan was sighing, several people suddenly walked in with a dining cart outside the door. One of them pushed the cart, one took out the food from the cart and handed it to the people on the table, and the other was responsible for holding a notebook and asked all people picking up meals must register above. Logan pointed to the person holding the book to register in confusion, and asked Lorna, "What is that doing?" Victor also discovered this special situation and couldn't help but ask, "Is it possible to register the food you want to eat and the canteen can prepare it in the afternoon?" Lorna smiled and shook her head. "No, the food in the canteen is uniformly supplied and the style is the same for everyone, and that one is just for registration. The purpose is to facilitate the counting of the amount of food received by everyone and avoid the dilemma of food shortage, and also allows the person preparing the food to have a certain amount, so as not to overdo it and cause waste." While they were talking, the food delivery person had already come to them. The food truck was full of food. In addition to the normal food for adults, there were also some smaller, but more exquisite, children's meals. The person responsible for distributing food handed the food to several people and took out a book to ask for registration. Logan looked at the account book filled with names. Although he had some doubts in his heart, he still signed his name. The food prepared in the cafeteria today is very simple, including baked potatoes, broth, some vegetables and sausages. Since it is a big pot of rice, the taste is naturally not delicious, but it is understandable. After all, it is a gathering place for mutants. Everyone can only rely on the income from the farm to have enough food and clothing. No one will ask for too rich food, and everyone is very happy to eat. Caliban enjoyed it even more. In this safe place, he was willing to eat only bread. After taking a few bites, Logan suddenly thought of the prison where he rescued Lorna. He couldn't help but ask Lorna. There were many mutants imprisoned in the previous prison. Why didn't you rescue those people? If I join you, the strength of the sanctuary can also be enhanced. Although there are currently more than 100 people in the shelter, which is enough to withstand some small attacks, if there is a major crisis, these people still don't seem to be enough. Since he wanted to build a shelter to protect mutants, Logan felt that he should try his best to expand the number of mutants and seek the power to protect themselves. Lorna smiled and shook her head. Logan, you have to know that the purpose of the asylum is to protect mutants, but not everyone can join. If some evil guys are allowed to enter, I'm afraid the entire asylum will be destroyed. It turned everything upside down. And not everyone can adapt to the shelter's management methods. For example, there are various systems such as eating on schedule, applying for going out, and not being able to go out after 10 o'clock. Many people cannot adapt. Lorna sighed and pointed to the food on the table. Then there are resources. Our resources here are limited. After all, it is difficult to feed too many people with just one farm, not to mention that not all mutants are friends. This only accepts friends. Logan nodded suddenly. Although the shelter is to protect mutants, it is obvious that not all mutants will be admitted. This is understandable. After all, if there are too many people, there will be a mixed crowd. Not only is it difficult to manage, safety will also be threatened to a certain extent. At this moment, Lorna suddenly stopped holding the spoon in her hand and looked out the door with a smile. Makar is here. Logan and the others looked back and saw Micah walking in with a smile. He clearly knew everyone at the shelter, greeting everyone cordially and asking for trivia. Soon, he came to Logan's table and said with a smile, "Hello, how are you? Is the food here suitable for you? If you have any needs, please tell us. Within the allowed range, we can make it appropriate. Improve the taste of food." "No, that's good enough." Logan smiled and nodded in response. "That's good." Micah also smiled, then straightened up, glanced around the canteen, and said loudly, "Everyone, please excuse me for your mealtime. Let me introduce a few new companions who have joined our shelter, Wolverine Logan, ex-Professor Charles, and several of their friends. These two were once X-Men. I believe everyone here has heard of their names. Today, I am honored that they have joined our big family." When Micah's voice fell, everyone turned to look at Logan and Charles, applauding excitedly. Although the X-Men have completely declined, they are still an irreplaceable symbol among the mutant community. These people obviously welcome the members of the X-Men. Micah reached down and pressed down, stopping the applause that echoed throughout the cafeteria. "Let's continue eating. You can see each other more often in the future." After speaking, he smiled and said to Logan and the others, "It seems that everyone is very welcome to join us. I hope you can live here happily." Logan smiled slightly awkwardly. He was really not used to being watched and applauded by everyone. Charles, on the other hand, responded with ease and responded with a smile, "Thank you for the hospitality. I believe I will be able to spend the last days of my life here." Micah nodded with a smile, then leaned over to Logan and whispered, "Logan, after you finish eating, take your friends to my office. I need to talk to you about something." His voice was slightly serious, as if he had something important to do. After thinking for a moment, Logan nodded and said, "Okay, we'll go there after dinner." He guessed that Micah was planning to arrange a task for them. It might be a rather troublesome task, otherwise he wouldn't have arranged it when they first settled in the shelter. Obviously, there were not enough people under his command to mobilize. However, Logan did not think of refusing. Now that he was living in someone else's shelter and had become a member of the shelter, he could not eat for free. He still had to contribute what he should. After hearing Logan's response, Maka smiled and nodded, "Let's eat first. I wish you a good meal." I'll wait for you in the office. On an island in the lake in downtown Washington, there stands a majestic three-winged building. In the director's office on the top floor, Maria Hill opened the door seriously and asked, "Director, what do you want from me?" She stood in the middle of the office and looked at the man behind the desk. "This is a document sent from Canada. Take a look." Nick Fury looked solemn and pressed a button, and a light blue holographic projection was projected in front of Hill. Hill looked at the projected content. It was a video file with a photo attached. In the picture, a figure with steel claws is killing everyone in the prison. Even though he looks a little old, he is still like a ferocious wolf, ruthlessly harvesting the lives of the prison guards, and his body is soaked in blood, like a demon from hell. The video ends when all the prison guards fall down. Hill turns off the video and looks at another photo. The photo was taken on a loose road. There was a pool of dazzling blood flowing on the ground, and a white skeleton lying in the blood. It looked like it had been dead for many years, but the clothes on its body were brand new. "Is that Wolverine in that video just now?" Hill looked stunned for a moment. Although the figure in the video is very similar to Wolverine, she does not believe that it is Wolverine. She prefers to believe that it is a Wolverine clone developed by some laboratory. After all, the Wolverine in the picture looked obviously much younger, and his sense of strength was obviously stronger. It was really far from the Wolverine in her impression. However, it was Fury who responded to her with a heavy nod. He said with a serious look, "Judging from the information currently available, it is indeed him." "How could this happen?" Hilton suddenly looked shocked. "As far as I know, he looks at least 70 or 80 years old, and his actual age is nearly 100 years old. His physical fitness has seriously declined, but the guy in the picture is obviously younger and stronger. The suppressed self-healing factor cannot help him rejuvenate." Quote, "They are well aware of the fact that the government develops genetically modified food to suppress the X gene, and Wolverine is one of the victims. Now he can display the strength shown in the video. He may have taken less enhanced serum." Fury shrugged and gave what he thought was the most reasonable explanation. "The current situation is that they have now gone to Canada." "Return to your homeland." Hill smiled. "I thought he would never go back in his life." Fury also looked helpless. Who knows what they think? In short, although he is Canadian, he is also on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s wanted list. "We must follow up and investigate this matter," he added. "But until we find him, you don't need to take action yet." Hill was a little confused. "Then why did you come to me?" "That photo." Fury's expression became extremely solemn and he said in a deep voice, "Compared to Wolverine, the murderer in the photo is the key. Obviously, another dangerous mutant has appeared. Before him you have to confirm his identity before continuing to do evil." In his opinion, Wolverine's counterattack was just the last unwilling roar of an old man who was driving him to death, and the guy who melted dozens of pickets into bones was obviously more threatening. Originally, mutants are no longer a thing, but because of the experiments conducted by people like Rice, those dangerous guys are ready to take action again. Fury said with a look of disgust. He dislikes these dangerous experiments, but this kind of mutant experiments cannot be stopped. After all, there are many people who want to explore the secrets of the X gene and use it for themselves. But the problem is, those guys who are obsessed with experiments can't control the products they develop, so emergencies occur frequently, and they have to be solved by S.H.I.E.L.D. in the end. Fury took a deep breath helplessly. Compared to the elderly Wolverine and Professor X, these unknown mutants with unknown identities and terrifying abilities were more worthy of their worries. "Yes, I will investigate it myself." Hill also realized the seriousness of the matter, stood up straight and nodded seriously. Bang. However, just before she left, the door suddenly opened. "Investigating what?" An aristocratic man wearing a high-end casual suit and a mustache walked into the office calmly and sat on the sofa as if no one else was around. "It seems that I missed some big events during my vacation these days." Fury looked at the man, with helplessness written on his face, and scolded, "Tony, I told you to knock on the door before entering my office." "I knocked." Tony looked cynical and fiddled with the ornaments on the table casually, saying indifferently, "Maybe you were too absorbed in chatting and didn't hear." Fury felt a headache and said helplessly with a sullen face, "What are you looking for me for?" Tony paused while fiddling with the furnishings, raised his head, abandoned his relaxed look, and asked in a deep voice, "I heard that you lost the spiritual scepter." Fury's already dark face instantly darkened. This is S.H.I.E.L.D.'s business, you have no right to interfere. Hearing this, Tony snorted coldly. Oh, at least I carried the nuclear bomb for it, and at the same time, it was also for you and S.H.I.E.L.D. Fury was speechless and stared at Tony with his only remaining eye. Since the Battle of New York, this guy has suffered from severe anxiety disorder. He is always particularly concerned about the topic of aliens. It is said that he has been building armor at home day and night to guard against the attack of aliens. Fury is also very troubled by this. After a long silence, Fury said, "Go home and rest. I will investigate this matter and give you an explanation. But this time it is definitely not taken by aliens, it should be the Hydra fools. You don't have to worry so much." Tony did not speak, nor did he mean to leave. Hill, who was standing aside, looked at the confrontation between the two and said tactfully, "I'm leaving first. I will report to you if there is any new situation." After that, he opened the door and left, walking straight to the elevator. But as soon as the elevator door opened, Steve Rogers was seen standing alone in the elevator. "Captain, if you are here to see Director Fury, Tony is in his office." Hill smiled and greeted Steve, and at the same time couldn't help looking back at Fury's office, and muttered again, "And I guess they won't finish talking so quickly." However, Steve made way for Hill in the elevator, and his eyes were fixed on Hill. "I came to see you. They said you were at Fury's, so I came here specially." "Looking for me?" Hill walked into the elevator, stood with Steve, and looked at him puzzledly. "Yes." Steve nodded, and as the elevator door closed and slowly descended, he spoke again, "Are you investigating Logan?" Hill looked at Steve's eyes, full of urgent questions. This look made Hill stunned for a moment, and subconsciously wanted to shake his head and refuse to tell any information. But Steve spoke first. "Don't try to deceive me. I have investigated clearly. Logan is now accused of being a wanted criminal, but it is obvious that the evidence chain for his conviction is insufficient. He can only be regarded as a suspect now." While speaking, Steve handed over a document, which was the result of his investigation in recent days. After a pause, he added, "And the matter of the last auction, you clearly know that auctioning mutants is illegal, but you S.H.I.E.L.D. turned a blind eye to it. Why is that? In addition, according to the intelligence I investigated, 80% of the people who participated in the auction have large amounts of black production, and the remaining 20% of people are more or less involved in some black industries, and among them, there are some officials, but you still ignore it. Is this S.H.I.E.L.D.'s attitude towards criminals? Chasing a suspect, but turning a blind eye to those criminals with sufficient evidence?" Steve looked cold, obviously angry at these practices of S.H.I.E.L.D. Hill looked at the documents Steve handed over, was slightly stunned, and then smiled. "Captain, it seems that you are not an honest American soldier. These intelligence cannot be obtained by ordinary means. Special cases should be treated specially." Steve responded calmly, and then said again, "I request to participate in the investigation of Logan." "Pay attention to the wording, Captain." Hill shook his head and said, "We are not investigating Wolverine, but arresting him." "Even so, I want to participate in it." Steve's eyes were firm, and he seemed to be determined to participate in all actions against Logan. However, Hill finally shook his head. "Captain, cases involving mutants are very dangerous and complicated. Too many things have happened in the years you have been frozen. Many things cannot be explained to you. Even if they are explained, you may not understand. In short, don't try to intervene in this matter, at least not now." After she finished speaking, the elevator arrived at the first floor, and the elevator door slowly opened. Hill walked out without hesitation, not giving Steve any chance to refute. Steve looked at Hill's back and muttered in a deep voice, "The Avengers are not affiliated with S.H.I.E.L.D. Mutant Sanctuary Farm. After dinner, Logan, Victor, and Caliban pushed the professor to Macca's office. This is a small building in the middle of the farm. The office is not big, but the facilities are very complete, even with a coffee machine, but there are more messy intelligence. When they arrived, Macca was sitting in the office checking the documents on the table. When he saw the few people coming, he warmly invited them to sit down and poured a few glasses of water. "It's almost time to rest, so I won't drink tea and coffee. I can only use these glasses of water to entertain you." Macca handed the cups of water to the few people and sat down on the sofa at the same time. "Thank you, water is fine." Logan nodded in response, and then asked curiously, I don't know why you called us here this time. As long as it doesn't violate the principles, I can help. He could see that Maka asked them to come here, and he must have something to ask for. Maka smiled and said, there are indeed some things that need to be done for you, including the professor. I'm afraid you will have to work hard later. After this, Charles was slightly stunned, and then he said with embarrassment, although I am happy to help, my body can't stand the tossing now. If I participate in the mission, it will be a drag. No, you misunderstood. Maka shook his head and explained, of course I won't assign you any tasks. Although there are indeed many things to do on the farm, we don't have to let an old man complete these trivial tasks. This confused several people. Logan asked with a puzzled look on his face, what do you need the professor for? Micah hesitated and smiled bitterly. I hope the professor can resume his old career as a teacher and teach the children in the shelter. Teaching. Charles was stunned for a moment, and then he was flattered and said, no, I haven't taught students for a long time. I'm afraid I can no longer become a qualified teacher. He is almost 100 years old now. At such an old age, it is difficult to teach any students. Professor, please don't be humble. The knowledge in your brain is definitely the most precious treasure in the history of human civilization. I very much hope that it can be passed on and let these children master this knowledge. I think this is what you hope to see. Yes. Micah looked at the professor expectantly. If it wasn't impossible, I wouldn't bother you. It's just that the resources of the shelter are limited now. We don't have that much money to hire good teachers, but I don't want to let those children live their whole lives. I can't feel the charm of learning. Fortunately, you are here. I hope you can fill these gaps. Charles hesitated, glanced at Logan and the others, thought of the little mutants including Laura, and finally nodded, okay, but I need 2 days to prepare. I haven't taught in too many years. I need time. Let's get back to where I was when I was a teacher. Maka suddenly smiled. That's great, Professor. I believe the children will like your education very much, and your knowledge will be passed down among them. I thank you on behalf of the children. Charles smiled wryly, waved his hands, and stopped talking. Micah looked at Logan and Victor again. Logan, I hope you and Victor can also serve as teachers in the shelter. These words once again stunned the two of them, and Victor said bluntly, I think you must be crazy. He and I don't even have academic qualifications, and we don't know how to teach children. Both of them are almost 200 years old. In their time, what they learned was different from what they learn now, and neither of them had any schooling experience. No, I hope you can teach me some combat self-defense skills and combat experience. Micah answered again, and then said with a bitter look on his face, to be honest, although there are more than 100 mutants in our shelter, there are only about 10 people who are actually capable of fighting, and the others are not too old to be able to fight. In combat, he is still too young and has not fully developed his abilities. If we are surrounded and suppressed by government forces, the current combatants alone will not be enough. We urgently hope that you two can improve some combat capabilities for some school-age children and expand the defense force of the shelter. After Micah finished speaking, he looked at the two of them with a sincere expression. Only then did Logan understand the purpose of Micah looking for them. He thought he was going to arrange a task, but he didn't expect that they would be asked to serve as teachers in the shelter. After thinking for a while, Logan nodded and said, if we just teach combat ability and combat experience, Victor and I can do it. Both of them fought from World War II to the present. In terms of combat experience, I am afraid that no one has more combat experience than them. Grateful, Micah breathed a sigh of relief again, and finally looked at Caliban with a smile on his face. Caliban, although I can't arrange anything for you now, your abilities are very important to our sanctuary and we need to rescue other mutants. I'm afraid I need you to take action when the time comes, and I hope you won't refuse. Of course, don't worry, it's just tracking, and we will try our best to avoid putting you in danger. Quote. Caliban heard the importance Micah attached to him in his words, and a smile suddenly appeared on his face. Of course, don't worry, I can do anything as long as safety can be guaranteed. Micah nodded with a smile, and smiled sincerely at a few people. Thank you for your help to the shelter. Logan smiled and waved his hand. Now that we are also members of the shelter, it is our duty to do what we can. After saying that, he suddenly thought of something and said with some worry, "By the way, is there any way you can get some medicine? The professor suffers from Alzheimer's disease and needs medication, but we don't have much medicine left." Without drug suppression, Logan was worried that the professor would erupt in a state of confusion that could destroy the entire sanctuary. "This is a small matter." Micah smiled and said, "The medicines in our clinic are very complete. Basically, there are all the commonly used medicines on the market. If you need them, you can just register and get them." After establishing the shelter, Micah clearly understood the importance of medicine reserves. Many medicine shelters have preparations to prevent various accidents. Logan and Charles couldn't help but look at each other and immediately relaxed a lot. Medicines have always been what troubles them the most, and today's professors cannot live without those medicines. "Thank you." Charles and Logan quickly nodded their thanks. Micah smiled and waved his hand, and then chatted with a few people about some basic conditions of the shelter. By the time the chat ended, the sky was completely dark, the moon hung high, and the sky was full of stars. Logan and the others said goodbye to Micah and pushed the professor back to rest. When he returned to his residence, Logan couldn't help but ask, "What do you think of Micah?" Caliban thought for a moment, nodded and said, "I think he's pretty good, and he's very good to the people in the shelter." Victor was silent for a while and murmured, "I always feel that guy is a bit scheming, but overall he's not bad." Listening to the two answers, Logan nodded thoughtfully, and finally looked at Charles. "Professor, how do you feel?" Charles thought for a moment and nodded, "So far, I haven't felt any malice in his heart. He can see through people's hearts. He knows whether some people are friendly to him. Micah doesn't give him the impression of being a bad person." Logan was relieved. "Professor, I hope your intuition is right." Caliban couldn't help but roll his eyes at Logan. "Logan, your burden is getting smaller and smaller. After so many years of fleeing, we finally found a place with a place to sleep and food to eat. It's not hot or noisy, and the scenery is beautiful. You don't have to worry about waking up and finding a place full of pickets outside the door. Don't think too much. Just stay here honestly." Logan smiled bitterly, feeling that many years of fleeing had indeed made him too cautious. Thinking about it, he patted Caliban's shoulder. "Okay, take the professor to take a shower first." As Caliban pushed the professor into the bathroom, the door was suddenly knocked. Logan looked at the sky, wondering who else would come to visit in the middle of the night. When he opened the door, he saw Lorna standing outside. She smiled and asked Logan, "We need to go out tomorrow to buy some supplies for the shelter. Do you and Victor want to go together?" Before Logan could speak, Victor in the living room quickly stood up, ran over, and nodded repeatedly. "Let's go, we must go." He looked at Lorna excitedly. After 200 years, he thought he would never come back, but now that he has returned to his hometown, he must go out for a walk. In the early morning, there was mist in the forest. There was no noise of cars or people, only the crisp chirping of birds. Fresh air seeped into the room from the window, and Logan on the bed slept contentedly. After years of fleeing, he hadn't had such a comfortable sleep for a long time. Even the biological clock that usually woke him up on time was relaxed in this relaxing environment, making him sleep for a long time. It was a pity that such a leisure time was awakened by Lorna's knock on the door. She told Logan that he had to leave. Victor also woke up when the knock on the door sounded. Several people went to the cafeteria to eat a sandwich for breakfast, and then they had to leave. Lola, who was also eating breakfast in the cafeteria, noticed their movements and hurried over to pull Logan's trouser legs, saying that she wanted to go with them. But her request was rejected by Logan, who hoped that the girl could stay with her friends. Fortunately, Laura was very sensible and did not force him. She just told Logan to be careful and went back to have breakfast with her friends. When Logan and his friends arrived at the pickup truck, they found that there was an orange-haired beauty who would act with them. Sonia Simonson, codenamed Dream, can add or delete other people's memories by exhaling mist from her mouth. Like the professor, she is a rare psychic. But her ability is obviously inferior to that of the professor. The purchase list is very simple, just food and medicine, as well as some daily necessities on the farm. At the same time, they also need to pull the crops from the farm out to sell. At this time, the pickup truck's cargo box is already full of eggs, milk, and handmade products made by everyone. Back to square one. In the driver's seat of the pickup truck, Logan looked at the navigation on the mobile phone map and couldn't help but smile bitterly. I didn't expect that I still had to deliver goods in Canada. Stop complaining, drive. Victor in the passenger seat seemed very excited. He was obviously looking forward to this city that existed in his memory 200 years ago. He couldn't help but say, Alberta, we are back again. The conversation between the two aroused the interest of Laura in the back seat. She leaned over and asked curiously, Uncle Wolf, have you been here before? Logan nodded. To be precise, I came from Edmonton, Alberta, which is my hometown. Hey, this is also my hometown. Victor couldn't help but complain, looking at Lorna unhappily and said, Kid, you should ask me. Lorna nodded and asked curiously again, do you want to go back and have a look? I can deliver the goods with Sonia later, and you can go back when you have time. I will explain to Maka, and I think he will understand. As soon as these words came out, Logan and Victor fell silent instantly, and the original laughter seemed to be punctured by these words. Go back. They don't even know if the Howlett farm is still there. Maybe it has been occupied by others, or it may have become a commercial residential area. In any case, it will not be what they remember. Seeing them silent, Lorna immediately realized that she had said the wrong thing, and quickly said, sorry. She remembered that Logan and the others were almost 200 years old, and it was very likely that the home they knew well had disappeared long ago. This topic obviously touched their sore spot. It's okay, let's go deliver the goods first. Logan shook his head, started the pickup truck, and slowly drove out of the farm. After so many years of operation, Maka has taken care of all aspects of the farm. Whether it is eggs, milk, or handicrafts, there are special consignees. Logan and his team only need to drive the car there to collect the money. They don't even need to move the goods. There will be special workers to unload them. After Lorna's explanation, Logan and Victor also understood the importance of the goods on the car. Eggs and milk, as well as these handicrafts, can be said to be the main source of income for the farm. More than 130 people in the shelter have to rely on these to make a living. Without these things, the shelter has no ability to support so many people. In order to conceal the truth, the farm of the shelter is specially set up in the mountains and forests far away from the city. It is very remote. After driving for more than 2 hours, it arrived in the city of Edmonton. Alberta is a province, and Edmonton is a city in the province. In the car, Logan looked at the tall buildings in the city and the cars speeding by on the road, and couldn't help but sigh. The changes are too big. This is completely different from my impression of Edmonton. Logan looked at the prosperous city and couldn't help but sigh. When he left, most of the houses here were no more than 2 floors, and the road was also a muddy dirt road when it rained. The main means of transportation on the road were horse-drawn carriages. In just 200 years, this place has completely become a modern city, completely erasing all his memories of the city. In 200 years, the changes here can be said to be earth-shaking. Victor also sighed. The city no longer has any of the familiar appearances they are familiar with. Even the hills and forests that used to be razed to the ground for the development of the city, and high-rise buildings were built on them. Lorna and Sonia in the back seat obviously couldn't understand the current mentality of these 2 old antiques, and could only shake their heads helplessly. Under Lorna's guidance, Logan found the merchant who was going to receive the goods. After selling the goods in the car, Logan drove to the shopping mall for purchase. There are a lot of things to purchase today. If we act together, it may be too late. We have to purchase separately. Lorna looked at the list made by Macaro and had a headache. Logan looked at the list and said, purchase separately. Just tell us where to find these things. Anyway, this is Canada, the danger is not that high, and Lorna's combat power is not weak, so it is unlikely to be dangerous to go separately. Lorna nodded. Now we have to do this. After that, she tore off a section of the list and handed it to Logan. These are the medicines needed for the shelter. You can go to the pharmacy 1 kilometer ahead to get them. Macaro has said hello to the pharmacy and will prepare them for us according to the list. Sonia and I will buy daily necessities and food. We will gather here in an hour and a half. Well, okay. Logan took the list and looked at it, and nodded in agreement. Lorna and Sonia turned and entered the mall, and began to purchase the items needed according to the list. Logan and Victor drove to the pharmacy. As Lorna said, the process of buying medicine was very simple. After the people in the pharmacy knew that it was Maka's goods, they took the list to prepare. However, the staff told them that the pharmacy was too busy today, and it might take an hour to prepare these medicines. 1 hour, we can't wait here. Victor stood at the door of the pharmacy and kicked the stones at his feet out of boredom. Then what do you want to do? Logan took out a cigarette and lit it, and responded with smoke rings. Let's go for a drink. I saw a pub that looks good on the road just now. Victor pointed to a pub in the distance and suggested excitedly. No, Logan knew that the two drunkards would definitely get drunk in the pub, and he didn't want to make trouble because of drinking. Just 2 drinks, nothing will happen. Victor begged, besides, don't you want to reminisce the special dishes and drinks of your hometown? Logan wanted to continue to refuse, but the memory of Wolverine in his mind was slightly touched by Victor's words. Feeling the fluctuation of the memory deep in his mind, Logan hesitated and nodded, okay, go and try it to see if it tastes the same as before. Victor heard this and couldn't wait to get in the car, took the initiative to take the task of driving, and drove Logan to the pub he had just seen. This is a pub with a very gorgeous sign. The font on the sign is painted with a layer of gold paint, which reflects a rich golden color under the sunlight. After Victor parked the car, he couldn't wait to push the door and enter the pub. Because it was the weekend, the pub was very lively. Many people held their glasses and talked loudly in the pub. There were only a few seats left in the huge pub. The staff in the pub also turned on all the colored lights to provide some drinking atmosphere in the daytime. The bartender at the bar kept waving the cocktail glass, showing off a very cool cocktail mixing technique, which attracted a group of girls with an obsessed look. After Logan and the other man found a seat and sat down, the waiter came up enthusiastically and handed out the menu. Victor took it with excitement, looked at the densely packed names of dishes on it, selected a few dishes that he remembered, and asked for 2 more bottles of wine. Soon, the wine and food were served, and Logan and Victor couldn't wait to take a bite. Fortunately, there is not much change, it still tastes the same as before. Victor chewed the food in his mouth with satisfaction, and then couldn't help but pick up the wine glass and took a big sip, and said excitedly, this wine also tastes the same as before, not bad at all, you try it. Logan also took a sip helplessly, and said with a bitter face, when I left with you, I hadn't learned to drink yet. When Wolverine left here, he was only 13 years old, and his memory of the taste of the wine in his hometown was blank. I did drink it secretly, and the taste was the same as now, but I was discovered at that time and almost had my legs broken. Victor held the wine glass with a smile, savoring the aroma of the wine in his mouth and savoring the past. Logan also smiled and shook his head and said, it's been almost 200 years, thanks to you for still remembering. How can I forget? Victor took a sip of wine and sighed, after all, I walked out of here. He paused and glanced at Logan, did you forget? How is it possible? It's only been nearly 200 years, and when they came back, this place was no longer familiar to them. Now, there are only these drinks and meals that can allow them to touch the ancient memory fragments in the deepest part of their memory. After a sigh, the two finished the wine and food, paid and were about to leave. But the door was suddenly knocked open, and a group of fully armed special police rushed in. Their posture instantly frightened the group of guests who were drinking in the tavern, and they couldn't help but exclaimed. The waiter also hurriedly turned off the colorful lights and turned on all the headlights, and the whole bar was completely bright. The patrol team is investigating the case, don't move. The captain of the special police held up his certificate and shouted at the panicked people. Everyone was so scared that they sat in their seats, looking at the posture of these people, and didn't dare to move at all. Logan and Victor stood in front of the bar, looking at these patrol teams, their fists hidden behind their backs clenched, and the steel claws between their fingers were ready to move. I didn't expect these guys to come to my door so soon. Victor also had a gloomy face. He stood beside Logan, opened his hands, and exerted force on his 10 fingers. His normal nails slowly became sharp. The SWAT officers rushed into the tavern and quickly controlled all the doors and windows of the tavern. But what surprised Logan was that these guys didn't seem to come for them. Even if they ran past them, they didn't notice that they were the 2 mutants on the wanted list. Instead, they searched every corner of the tavern, as if looking for something. Seeing this, Logan couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, and at the same time patted Victor to relax. Bang! At this time, a smaller figure suddenly rushed out of the crowd, and the speed was so fast that it was like a little cheetah. Catch him! The captain of the patrol team looked panicked and pointed at the small figure and shouted loudly. Logan looked carefully and found that it was a girl. She didn't look very old, and her face was full of panic. The two SWAT officers guarding the back door were ready, and they opened their hands to pounce on the little girl. But she suddenly tore the space apart, passed through the guards, and ran straight into the alley at the back door. Teleportation mutant. Victor looked at the girl's ability just now in surprise, and determined the attributes of her mutant ability. Logan also looked at the space that had been restored to its original state with a look of surprise. Teleportation is a very rare ability, and I didn't expect to encounter it here. But it is obvious that this girl has not yet mastered the ability, and the distance of teleportation is not long. Hurry up and chase her! The captain of the patrol team shouted loudly, and a group of special police rushed out to find the direction in which the girl fled. The captain of the patrol team and the other two team members continued to guard the tavern, shouting to everyone, "Don't mess around, sign the confidentiality agreement before leaving." But the process of the little girl using her mutant ability just now was seen by everyone, and many people were instantly scared. The whole tavern has become a mess. Go! While the patrol team was managing the chaotic crowd in the tavern, Logan hurriedly pulled Victor out the door and quickly got in the car to escape. Go directly. In the car, Victor looked at Logan in surprise. I don't know. Logan knew that Victor was talking about the mutant girl, but he was also very conflicted now. If he rescued the little girl in public, there would definitely be some traces left. His traces and even the traces of the shelter would be discovered. But if he didn't save her, he couldn't bear it, because the child was very young. Bang! Just as Logan was thinking deeply, a figure suddenly rushed out of the alley and hit the side of the moving car heavily. The sudden collision startled Logan, and he quickly looked in the rearview mirror and saw that it was the little girl from before. And behind her, the group of pickets were chasing quickly. Seeing this, Logan didn't have time to think too much, and slapped the steering wheel hard, shouting to the girl, "Get in the car." The little girl was stunned, but after looking at the pickets behind her, she didn't have time to think too much, and hurriedly opened the door and climbed into the back seat of the pickup truck. Logan stepped on the accelerator without hesitation, and the car sped out. The patrol team behind him saw this and hurriedly got in the car to chase after him. Thank you. The little girl looked at the patrol team's car with lingering fear and thanked Logan sincerely. Prestige +10. Logan noticed the change in the data on the panel, and after a little surprise, he smiled and said, "It's okay." While speaking, he kept looking at the girl's face carefully through the rearview mirror. Only then did he realize that the child was obviously an Asian, with yellow skin but long purple hair, a very delicate face, long ears, and strange purple pupils. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and looked well behaved. It seems that we can only notify Lorna and the others to take the medicine back first. Those guys are really chasing after them like dogs chasing meat. Victor looked at the rearview mirror, and the patrol team's police car whistled and sounded the siren, chasing closely behind. Let's leave the city first and let John send someone to pick up Lorna and the others. Logan stepped on the accelerator and rushed out of the city. We must get rid of these guys or get rid of them. In short, we must not let them follow us to find the location of the shelter. At the same time, in another city in Alberta, in the laboratory, Hill was looking at the bones, and suddenly the phone rang wildly. After she answered the call, she heard an anxious report. Wolverine appeared in Edmonton, and they rescued a little mutant captured by the patrol team. Listening to the report on the phone, the woman's face was shocked, and she hurriedly said in a stern voice, "Watch Wolverine, I will take people to support him immediately." Hill didn't expect that he was originally mainly investigating the new mutants, that is, the guy who melted the patrol team. The case is currently code-named Incineration, but he didn't expect to find Wolverine first. Let's go. She waved her hand to let her men call the Quinjet, but she didn't realize that the call was intercepted in New York, far away in the United States. Keep an eye on Wolverine. I'll bring people to support him right away. Hill's voice came out clearly from the loudspeaker, and Steve could hear her conversation with the agent clearly. After Hill hung up the phone, Steve smiled deeply. Thank you, Jarvis. You're welcome. Captain. Jarvis's mechanical voice came out from the loudspeaker. Hey, you should thank me. Tony, who was sitting on the other side of the sofa, pouted in dissatisfaction. Steve smiled, stood up, took a deep breath and said, I'll thank you after I finish the things in front of me and find him. Who is he that makes you care so much? Tony was curious. I just want to find out the truth. Steve sighed for a long time and shook his head a little tiredly. What truth? The truth of a period of history. It seems that I have to go to Canada in person after dealing with Hydra. Steve said, turned around and was about to leave Tony's residence. Whatever you want. Tony shrugged, and then seemed to think of something, and reminded Steve from behind, by the way, remember to turn on the location, so that we can find you when you fall into the Arctic Ocean again. What happened in the tavern soon alerted various security departments. The police officers at the city border received the order and immediately set up the checkpoints. Rows of steel lifting posts slowly extended from the ground. This kind of fine steel post, as long as it is fully extended, even tanks cannot pass through. But fortunately, Logan used the horsepower of the car to the extreme and rushed out of the city before the checkpoints were set up. Seeing that the interception was ineffective, the border guards quickly retracted the posts and sent the patrol team to chase them. Those guys are like mad dogs. Victor kept looking back, and several patrol cars drove at full speed, biting tightly, just like hyenas seeing a piece of meat. It's okay, there is a forest ahead, we can get rid of them there. Logan looked serious and calmly at the fork in the road ahead, which led to a lush forest. A winding path was interspersed in the forest, and there were many forked roads, which could easily get rid of the pursuers behind. Looking at the pursuers behind him, Logan seized the opportunity and turned the steering wheel sharply. The car body made a perfect drift on the flat road and quickly drove into the forest trail. The pursuers behind him also wanted to learn from Logan to turn the front of the car, but because the speed was too fast and the driver's operation was not skillful enough, the first car in the lead instantly overturned, and the car body rolled several times on the road. The life and death of the patrol members in the car was unknown. The cars behind were so scared that they stepped on the brakes quickly. Fortunately, there was no collision, but when they turned the front of the car again and entered the forest trail, they couldn't even see the taillights of Logan and his car. At the same time, Logan was speeding in the forest. This kind of forest trail is not only tortuous, but also has many forks. It is not easy to successfully find them in such a complex environment. Victor looked back at the situation behind from time to time, and he was relieved when he found that he had temporarily shaken off the pursuers. He glanced at the girl in the back seat, then looked at Logan, frowning and asked, "What should we do now?" This made Logan fall silent, and after a moment he said, "In short, we can't go back to the shelter in a short time, otherwise those guys with dog noses will definitely find the location of the shelter by smelling us." Victor nodded. The guards of the shelter are still too weak now. Once they are discovered, they will face a catastrophe. The patrol team's reconnaissance ability is extraordinary. As long as they leave any clues, they will probably be locked by those guys. Going back to the shelter now is no different from letting a wolf into the house. Let's find a place to hide first, and go back after the storm is over. Logan sighed helplessly, and couldn't help but glance at the girl behind him through the rearview mirror while speaking. The girl didn't know whether she was afraid or vigilant, and she shrank tightly in the chair in the back seat, not daring to move. "Don't worry, we won't hurt you. We are both mutants. My name is Logan and his name is Victor." Logan introduced the girl softly, and then asked, "Where is your home? Do you need to be sent back?" The girl was silent for a while, and then whispered, "My name is Clarice Ferguson." After that, her expression was a little gloomy. "My home has been blocked by those guys." Clarice. Logan was slightly stunned and realized that she was Twinkle, of course, Twinkle in her teenage years. Now she looks only 13 years old. He also noticed that Clarice's pupils were slightly purple, which was not too obvious at the moment. It should be the characteristics of mutant ability that are gradually showing up. "Do you have any other place to live? We can send you back." Logan continued to ask. Clarice shook her head with a gloomy face. Her residence has been completely blocked by the guys in the picket team, including her little cash and food left. Now she doesn't know where to go. Looking at the girl's appearance, Logan nodded and comforted her. In that case, then you can go back to the mutant shelter with us. Don't worry, there are mutants there, it's very safe, and there are many children about your age. But before that, you may have to wander outside with us for a few days. We can only go back after we completely get rid of those guys. Clarice listened to Logan's words, her brows slightly locked, obviously still a little wary, but thinking that she didn't know where to go, she could only nod helplessly in the end. Logan stopped talking and concentrated on driving the car. Soon, the car drove out of the forest, and there was a plain outside the forest, and the vision instantly widened. In the middle of the plain, there is a farm, and there are many barns around. After thinking for a while, Logan said to Victor, "This car has been noticed by the guys in the patrol team. It's too dangerous to drive it again. It has to be hidden." "Are you talking about those barns?" Victor understood what Logan meant and pointed to the farm to ask. Logan nodded. "After hiding the car, we will find a safe place to hide for a few days and see if John and his men can come to pick us up, or wait until the storm has passed and then find a chance to go back. The photos of this car have probably been reported to various police stations. It will be strictly checked if it appears anywhere. Driving it will only increase the risk of exposure." Logan drove the car to the door of a barn. The door was not locked, so Logan hid the car inside. But the noise attracted the migrant workers working on the farm. These guys thought it was some gangster who wanted to rob the farm, so they hurriedly ran over with shotguns, pointing the black muzzles at Logan and the others in the barn. "Hey, don't worry, we don't mean any harm." Logan quickly raised his hands and walked out of the barn. When these farm workers holding shotguns discovered that this was an old man in his 50s or 60s, they lowered their guard a little. "What are you doing here? This farm is private property and you cannot enter at will." The leader of the farm workers was still worried and asked Logan. "Don't be so stingy." Logan smiled and explained. "We are just a few travelers who have driven for more than 10 hours. We are really exhausted and want to find a place to rest. But as you can see, besides this farm, there are no buildings to rest in." "That's not okay. This is private property, leave now." The farm worker obviously didn't believe what Logan said and expelled him with a serious expression. "What's wrong? What are you doing here?" Just when Logan was about to continue speaking, a rough question came, and then a middle-aged man walked out. "Sir, there are several illegal intruders here," a farm worker quickly reported to the man. The man looked at Logan and the others, slightly stunned. Logan also looked at the man. Judging from the attitude of the farm workers, this man should be the farmer of this farm. Logan hurriedly said, "Sir, we are just travelers passing by and want to find a place to rest." "Put down your guns. Are you going to entertain these 3 passengers with shotguns?" The man scolded his farm workers, and then smiled at Logan and the others. "Of course you can rest. I have always been very hospitable. I'm really sorry. There are some gangsters around our farm from time to time. The farm workers are usually wary. I hope you don't blame them." The farm workers looked at each other and slowly put their guns back. The man spoke again. "Okay, you go to work, I will receive these guests." After saying that, he looked at Logan and the others again. "Hello, my name is James, and I am the owner of this farm. If you need to rest, there is a place on the farm, and I have just made lunch. You can provide it free of charge." James's enthusiastic attitude made Logan instinctively want to shake his head and refuse, but he thought that the guys on the picket team were chasing them. Maybe it would be safer to hide in the farm. After all, the farm was not small. Even if they were found by the picket team, they would still be safe. They can also escape quickly. Thinking of this, Logan smiled and nodded to James. "In that case, thank you Mr. James, we just need a place to rest." James smiled and walked with Logan and others through the farm to his house. Along the way, Logan noticed that the farm was quite large. It was a large area of lush farmland, exuding the fragrance of crops. In addition, there were horse pens, sheep pens, cattle pens, etc., and all kinds of livestock products. In the center of the farm, there is a very luxurious villa. James invited several people into the villa. As soon as they entered, Logan and the others were instantly shocked by the decoration of the villa. The retro decoration makes this villa look like it was built more than 100 years ago, and every detail of the decoration is full of luxury, including carpets and curtains from Persia, leather sofas from Italy, and noble wood carvings. The exquisite tables and so on are simply made of money. In the middle of the hall, there is a staircase leading to the second floor. The wooden staircase looks very contemporary. Clarice couldn't help but look around. She had never seen much of the world and was full of curiosity about everything. Logan looked at the retro decoration with interest. The layout of your house looks like something from more than 200 years ago. The decoration of the house here is so similar to his previous home, it feels like he has returned to the manor more than 100 years ago. James smiled and explained, "This layout is very old. It looked like this when I was born. I am a very nostalgic person. I have continued to use it since I inherited the family business." After speaking, James waved to a few people and guided them to the restaurant on the left. "Please follow me, the food is ready." At this time, the restaurant was filled with the aroma of food. The table was filled with sumptuous dishes, and a little boy was already sitting in front of the table. Seeing James leading the guests in, the little boy was obviously very surprised. He quickly jumped off the table and ran up, hiding behind James, with half his head shrunk, looking at Logan and the others with curiosity, and finally his eyes stopped at Clarice. Seemed very interested, but too timid to say hello. James smiled, pulled the child out from behind, and introduced with a smile, "This is my son George." The child is young and a little shy and dare not see people. Logan nodded, looked at the two of them, and asked curiously, "You two are the only ones in the villa. Where is the child's mother?" James's expression suddenly darkened. "She has passed away." Logan was stunned and said quickly, "I'm sorry." "Fine." James shook his head, as if he had looked away from everything. "She has been tortured by her illness for too long, and it would be painful to continue in this world." He made an invitation gesture, "Come and eat first. I believe these meals will be to your liking." Logan glanced at the dishes on the table, nodded slightly, and took Victor and Lacris to their seats. During the meal, James suddenly asked, "Are you here for tourism?" "Yes." Logan nodded. "We walked for a long time to get here. The next step is to leave Canada and continue traveling around the world." "So cool." George suddenly spoke and looked at Logan with excitement. "Then you must have seen a lot of things." Logan smiled and nodded. "Indeed, there are many beautiful scenery along the way." George's eyes shone, and then he looked at his father, and he was immediately discouraged. "I also want to travel, but my father doesn't have time at all, so I can only stay at school and on the farm." Logan smiled and encouraged, "You are still young now, and you will have opportunities when you grow up. I also lived on a farm when I was a child, and it was only after I grew up that I started traveling around the world. But after being out for a long time, I felt that the farm life is more leisurely." George still looked disappointed, "But it will still take a long time. I want to leave now, and no one comes to the farm. The only toys I can play with are the toys in the room. I'm bored." Logan asked in surprise, "Where are your friends? If you invite them, I believe they will be very happy to come and play in such a big farm." "No, their parents won't allow it." George shook his head in disappointment. "They all said that our family was cursed and they didn't let the children have contact with me at all." "Shut up, George." James suddenly slapped the table hard and yelled loudly. When George saw this, he was so frightened that he stuffed his mouth back and could only eat with his head buried in his mouth. Seeing James's angry face and George's frightened face, Victor couldn't help but lean into Logan's ear and whispered, "No wonder this guy is so enthusiastic after seeing us. It seems because no one to talk to." Logan glared at him and told him to shut up. James on the other side also looked at Logan and the others, and said with a smile, "Children are talking nonsense, don't mind." Logan smiled and nodded, but he was still a little curious about the so-called curse, but it was obvious that James didn't want to continue this topic. After the meal, James invited Logan and Victor. "I have saved a lot of portraits over the years, but I don't know much about painting. Since you two have traveled around the world, your horizons must be broader than mine. Can you help me take a look?" Logan and Victor looked at each other, smiled and shook their heads. "I am very happy to appreciate the painting, but we have not done any research on the painting. If you want to get any comments from us, I am afraid you will be disappointed." "Fine." James smiled. "Just think of it as me sharing my collection, just like a gathering of good friends." Logan and Victor nodded and followed James to the studio on the second floor. The place is filled with everything from portraits to still life paintings and even a few obscure abstract paintings. Logan and Victor didn't do much research on paintings, but after all, they had lived for 200 years and had more or less contact with some artists and the like. They couldn't make serious comments, but they could make some nonsense about some professional terms about paintings. While chatting about these paintings, Logan suddenly noticed a portrait locked in a glass cabinet. The portrait showed a woman wearing a white dress, and the woman's appearance gave Logan a feeling of familiarity. Victor also noticed this painting and whispered, "I really want to see this face somewhere." Logan nodded. At this time, the door was suddenly pushed open, and a farm worker stood outside the door anxiously, "Mr. Howlett." Logan was stunned and quickly looked back. At the same time, James next to him smiled and said, "Sorry, you two, I have to go take a look." Victor was surprised and whispered to Logan, "His surname seems to be Howlett too." Logan was also stunned. There was always a cloud of doubt gathering in his heart about James's background and the portrait in the cabinet. "Mr. Howlett, there are several police officers coming outside. I'm afraid you need to step in to solve the problem." The farm worker spoke to James very respectfully. Hearing this, Logan and Victor's hearts sank, and they couldn't help but look at each other. When James heard this, he also frowned, and immediately turned to the two Logans. "Boy, I'm very sorry, I have to leave to deal with some business issues on the farm, but I will be back soon. Just wait here for a while." When James came downstairs, Logan quickly ran to the window, gently opened the curtains, and looked down. "I saw several police cars outside the door, and several pickets were gathering beside the cars." Logan suddenly became nervous and subconsciously clenched his fists, preparing to escape from the farm. Soon, James appeared downstairs. He started talking to the pickets and showed them his ID. The people on the picket team seemed a little suspicious, but after answering the phone, they decisively returned the ID to James, then quickly got in the car and left the farm, without any intention of searching. Logan immediately breathed a sigh of relief, and then his clenched fists loosened. "Jimmy, come here and take a look." Big Victor suddenly shouted from behind. Logan looked in surprise and saw Victor standing in front of the glass cabinet. He dug out an old book from under the cabinet and pointed to the title page of the book with excitement. Logan walked over and saw Elizabeth Howlett written on it. "This is your mother's name." Victor looked at the name on the title page, then looked up at Logan, with a look of disbelief on his face. Logan was also stunned, thinking back to the layout of the villa, and seemed to remember something. "No, this is Howlett Manor. But I remember its address is not here." I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.